Have you ever noticed how quickly you blame yourself when something goes wrong? Even when the evidence says otherwise, even when it's clearly out of your hands, you still feel that gnawing sense that maybe, just maybe, it's your fault. That reflex isn't random. It's not self-awareness. It's not maturity. It's a survival tactic. Because when the world feels chaotic, painful and senseless, self-blame offers something irresistible, the illusion of control. If it's your fault, then maybe you could have stopped it. Maybe you can stop it next time. Maybe you're not powerless, just flawed. And flaws can be fixed. That's the trap. You see, random misfortune is unbearable, being truly helpless. That's a horror we don't know how to process. So we rewrite the story. We insert ourselves into the cause, just so we can believe we had a role. Not because we want to suffer, but because we need to believe the suffering makes sense. This is why children blame themselves for their parents' fights. Why survivors of abuse wonder what they did to provoke it. Why people stay in toxic relationships, convinced that if they just try harder, things will change. Because blaming yourself hurts less than believing no one is in control at all. But this reflex doesn't just shape personal pain, it becomes a pattern, a mental algorithm. You start to default to self-blame for every mistake, every conflict, every failure. Not because you're always at fault, but because blaming yourself gives you direction. Punish yourself. Fix yourself. Do better. Be better. It feels productive. It feels like action. But underneath, something darker is happening. You're building an identity out of shame, out of responsibility you were never meant to carry. You stop trusting your own instincts. You hesitate to speak up. You police your thoughts before anyone else can. You become your own warden. This self-inflicted control slowly aligns with the control imposed by others. Society, institutions, even loved ones benefit from your willingness to take the blame. It means you won't challenge the narrative. You won't question authority. You'll quietly absorb the guilt while the real source of harm stays hidden, untouched. And the worst part, you'll feel noble for doing it, because self-blame masquerades as strength, as maturity, as accountability. But what if it's actually the exact opposite? What if it's just fear dressed up as virtue? Fear of powerlessness, fear of randomness, fear of being a victim with no control. So you trade truth for stability. You let the lies soothe you. But here's the truth. Not everything that happens to you is about you. Not every storm needs a lesson. Not every trauma is a message from the universe about what you need to fix. Sometimes life just breaks things. Sometimes people are cruel. Sometimes you were never meant to control what happened. And that truth is terrifying. But it's also freeing, because once you stop pretending you caused the pain, you can finally grieve it. Instead of spinning in self-blame, you can start healing. You can stop holding the steering wheel of a car that was never yours to drive. You can let go, not of responsibility where it's truly yours, but of the compulsion to own what was never meant to be carried. The moment you stop blaming yourself just to feel in control is the moment you actually start to take real control of your healing, of your truth, of your life, and that's where the real power begins. Comfort keeps you stuck in broken places, not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, but because comfort lies. It tells you things are okay when they're not. It whispers that survival is enough. That numbness is peace. That stillness means safety. But look closer. Comfort is the quiet voice that convinces you to stay in a job that slowly kills your spirit. It's the reason you remain in relationships that drain you, spaces that shrink you, habits that rot you from the inside out, Because change feels harder than misery. Familiar pain is easier to digest than unfamiliar freedom. And so you stay in routines you hate, in patterns that betray you, in lives you no longer recognize, not because you don't want more, but because comfort wraps its arms around you and says, don't risk it. At least here, you know what to expect. That's the trap. Comfort doesn't heal wounds, it just hides them. It plasters over cracks with distraction. Streaming shows, takeout meals, empty scrolling, soft lights and soothing voices telling you everything is fine. But deep down, you know it isn't. You feel the fracture. You hear the silence between distractions. That aching awareness you've been suppressing. It's still there, waiting. And the longer you stay comfortable, the more it costs you. Growth doesn't happen where it's easy. Healing doesn't happen where it's quiet. The life you want, the one where you wake up and feel alive, won't come find you on your couch. You will have to go out and earn it. And earning it means pain, discomfort, conflict, loss. It means shattering illusions that once gave you peace. It means giving up comfort, at least for a while. But that's the paradox. Comfort keeps you broken because it feels like healing. It gives you just enough relief to keep going, but never enough to actually move. It's anesthesia, not medicine. And when you try to leave it behind, when you try to rise, you'll feel it pulling you back. Your own mind will sabotage you. It will beg you to return to the familiar, even if the familiar is killing you. Because your brain doesn't crave happiness. It craves predictability. And so it protects the status quo, the job, the toxic friendship, the scrolling, the numbness. Not because it's right, but because it's known. Because to your mind, the known feels safer than the unknown, even when it's unbearable. This is why people stay in broken places. Not because they love the pain, but because the pain has become home. And leaving home, no matter how dysfunctional, always feels like death. So you lie to yourself. You say it's not that bad. You say things will change soon. That you're just tired. That next week will be better. That you're waiting for the right time. But the right time never comes. Because comfort ensures it doesn't. It puts just enough air in your lungs to keep you afloat, but never enough to swim. And the world rewards it. The system loves comfortable people. They're predictable, easy to market to, easy to manage. They don't cause trouble. They don't demand more. They don't ask hard questions. They stay quiet. They stay in line. They consume endlessly, entertainment, products, ideology, all in the name of comfort. You were born to become, and becoming hurts. It means facing the fact that your job is a dead end, that your relationship is a slow death, that your habits are your prison, that your comfort isn't saving you, it's sedating you, it's robbing you of the only thing you truly own, your time, because comfort never demands urgency. It says you can wait, you can fix it later, but one day you'll wake up and there won't be a later. There will only be what's left. So ask yourself, what is your comfort costing you? Your dreams, your freedom, your integrity, your life? Because every day you stay comfortable in broken places, you pay. You pay in years, in silence, in potential, in pieces of yourself you'll never get back. Don't wait for the pain to be unbearable. Don't wait until the walls collapse. Discomfort is the doorway to everything you want. The truth is this: comfort keeps you stuck, and if you want out, you're going to have to choose courage over ease, truth over anesthesia, change over familiarity. You're going to have to walk away from the warm, familiar lie and step into the cold, honest unknown. And when you do, it'll hurt, but it'll also heal. because growth is not found in comfort. It's found in the courage to leave it behind. You wake up, grab your phone, scroll through a flood of emails, updates, reminders. Already, the day feels like it's running faster than you are. There's a meeting at 10, a deadline at noon, errands in the evening, maybe if there's time, a moment to breathe. You're busy. But are you important? Busyness is seductive. It gives you the illusion of movement, of purpose, of being in demand. It tricks you into thinking that filling every moment with tasks means you're doing something that matters, but deep down, you suspect it. You feel it, the gnawing emptiness beneath the noise. You confuse busy with important. There's a reason why we've been taught, since childhood, to associate effort with value. The more you work, the more you're worth. The more exhausted you are, the more respect you deserve. Productivity isn't just encouraged, it's worshipped. But ask yourself, how many of those tasks truly change anything? How many emails sent? How many meetings attended? How many deadlines met actually move the needle on your life, your values, your dreams? Busyness is the perfect distraction. It protects you from deeper questions. Who am I when I'm not doing something? What do I really want? What happens if I slow down long enough to listen to my own thoughts? That silence. It terrifies you. So instead, you stay in motion, because motion feels like meaning. But here's the truth, motion isn't progress. Just because you're spinning doesn't mean you're going anywhere. Hamsters run in wheels too. This is no accident. The system rewards your confusion. It needs you chasing tasks, optimizing routines, downloading productivity apps, believing that one more hour, one more project, one more hustle will finally give you peace. But it never does, because the goal isn't to finish, it's to keep you running. You confuse urgency with significance. Every ping, every alert, every blinking red icon is a claim on your attention. And you answer, not because it's meaningful, but because it's immediate. You don't prioritize what matters. You react to what's loudest, and slowly your life becomes a series of reflexes, not choices. You live in triage, always managing, never creating. That meeting you didn't need to be in. That task you only did because someone else dropped the ball. That hour you spent rearranging the deck chairs while the ship drifted off course. All of it drains you. But you tell yourself it's worth it. You point to your full calendar, your late nights, your fatigue. See, you say, I matter, but exhaustion isn't proof of importance. It's often evidence of misalignment. Think about the people you admire, not for how much they do, but for the impact they make. Do they operate in chaos, or do they protect their time, their focus, their clarity? Do they say yes to everything, or do they guard their attention like it's sacred? The truth is, if everything is important, then nothing is. You've been tricked into believing that saying yes makes you valuable, but it's the no that defines your life. The boundaries you draw, the priorities you honor, the things you choose to leave undone. Busyness is easy. Importance is hard. Importance requires stillness, reflection, the courage to ask hard questions about your direction, not just your speed. It demands clarity, and clarity demands subtraction. Not more tasks, but fewer, better ones. Not more noise, but deeper focus. The system doesn't want you to realize this, because a clear mind is dangerous. A still mind sees through the illusion. A focused person can't be manipulated. Busy people obey. Important people choose. And here's the trap. The busier you are, the more you numb yourself to that deeper ache, the one that asks, is this it? You think if you just keep going, you'll outrun the discomfort. But you won't. It'll be waiting for you when you stop. And eventually, you will stop. You'll burn out, break down, or simply run out of years. And what will you have then? A resume of tasks, a collection of to-dos, or a life that meant something. You confuse being needed with being valued. People email you because they know you'll respond. They give you work because they know you won't say no. But this doesn't mean you're respected. It means you're convenient. And convenience isn't the same as significance. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all, not because you're lazy, but because you're strategic. Because you're choosing what matters over what screams the loudest. You confuse exhaustion with purpose. You wear your burnout like a badge of honor. You brag about how little you sleep, how much you juggle, how little time you have. But this isn't pride, it's a cry for help, disguised as hustle. Rest isn't a weakness, it's resistance. In a world that profits from your distraction, your fatigue, your confusion, clarity is rebellion. Rest is clarity. Clarity is freedom. So ask yourself, right now, are you doing what's meaningful or just what's familiar? Are you living on purpose or just living on autopilot? Because you can't live a meaningful life if you're too busy to think about what that means. Stop mistaking movement for progress. Stop confusing busyness with worth. Be still, and in that stillness, ask the question that busy people fear the most. What if the most important thing I do today is stop? Have you ever found yourself frantically explaining your intentions just to stop someone from misunderstanding you? Maybe it's a partner who took your silence the wrong way, a friend who misread your tone, a coworker who thought your hesitation meant disapproval. You didn't mean to offend anyone, but suddenly you're in defense mode, over-explaining, justifying, clarifying, begging, in a way, to be seen correctly. Why? Because being misunderstood feels like a threat, not just a social inconvenience, but a danger, a fracture in your sense of identity, a warping of who you are in someone else's mind, and that distortion. It burns, it claws at your sense of control. Because if someone sees you wrongly, believes something about you that isn't true, who's to say that version of you won't start to replace the real one? So you explain, you rationalize, you fight for clarity, not just to be understood, but to survive. But here's the trap. The more you try to explain yourself, the more exposed you feel. Because explanation is vulnerability. It's revealing not just your actions, but your motivations. It's opening your inner world to someone who may not even be willing to meet you halfway. And when they don't, when they reject your truth, now your pain doubles. Now it's not just that they misunderstood, it's that they didn't care enough to understand, even after you tried. And so begins the loop. You keep clarifying, rephrasing, softening your tone, shrinking yourself, all in service of being accurately perceived. But the harder you try, the more anxious you become. Because now you're not just trying to fix a misperception, you're desperately trying to protect your identity from erosion. This fear is primal. We are social creatures, wired to seek belonging, and misunderstanding feels like exile. To be seen wrongly is to be cast out from the safety of shared understanding. It means you're no longer in sync with the group, the tribe, the partner. You're now the other, the misfit, the liar, the villain, the fool, depending on what they believe about you. And this rejection, even when it's subtle, feels like death. Psychological death. Because identity, at its core, isn't just how you see yourself, it's how others reflect you back. We rely on those mirrors to stay coherent. When they crack, so do we. So we try to fix the reflection. We over-communicate. We write long texts. We call at odd hours. We apologize for things we didn't even do. just to restore harmony. But underneath all of that effort is one simple plea. Please see me clearly. Please don't make me disappear beneath your misunderstanding. But here's the cruel paradox. Every time you beg to be understood, you hand over your sense of self to someone else. You let their perception define your reality. You let their approval validate your worth. And when they withhold it, you crumble. That's why explaining yourself feels safer, because it gives the illusion of control. See, the illusion that if you just say it the right way, they'll get it. They'll see you. They'll forgive you. But often they don't, because sometimes people don't want to understand. They want to dominate the narrative, and your explanations, they become evidence, ammunition, proof that you're desperate, that you're uncertain, that maybe they were right about you all along. That's when the trap snaps shut. You've traded your peace for the hope of validation. You've sacrificed your boundaries just to be seen. And the more you do it, the more you lose yourself, not in silence, but in noise. So what's the way out? You learn to tolerate being misunderstood. You learn that not every misperception requires correction, that your worth is not up for public debate, that the truth of who you are doesn't need a defense attorney. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say nothing. Let the misunderstanding stand. Let it echo unanswered, because your clarity doesn't live in someone else's approval. It lives in your ability to hold on to your truth, even when no one else believes it. And yes, that's terrifying. To walk through the fire of misjudgment and not reach for water, to resist the urge to clean up every mess that someone else made out of your story. It's sovereignty. It's the moment you stop performing and start existing on your own terms. So the next time someone twists your words, misunderstands your silence, or paints you with a brush that isn't yours, pause, breathe. Remember this. You don't owe everyone an explanation, especially not at the cost of yourself. Let them misunderstand you if they must, because being misunderstood is painful, but losing yourself to avoid it, that's the real tragedy. You know the pain, the routine that quietly suffocates you, the job that drains your soul, the relationship that numbs your spirit, the habits that chain you to a version of yourself you no longer recognize, and yet you stay. You always stay. Why? Because familiar pain is easier than change. Change is chaos. It's stepping into a world without guarantees, without maps, without the soft cushion of routine failure. Pain, at least the kind you know, has a rhythm. It hurts. Yes, but it's predictable, manageable. You've built defenses around it, told yourself stories to make it make sense. You've even learned to extract comfort from it, like a prisoner who decorates their cell. That's the trap. Not the pain, but the familiarity. You wake up each day and walk through a life that doesn't fit, wearing a smile that doesn't belong to you. You tell yourself, it's not that bad. Others have it worse. At least you know what to expect. At least you're surviving. But you're not living. You're tolerating. You're managing misery, because it's easier than gambling with the unknown. That's the twisted reward of familiar pain. It doesn't demand courage. Change does. Change demands that you question everything, that you walk away from the known, that you confront not just what hurts, but what you've built around the hurt. Your coping mechanisms, your identity, your entire worldview. Change is terrifying because it means leaving behind the safety net of your excuses. It means admitting out loud that you want more, that you deserve more. And that's dangerous. Because once you admit it, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to pretending that the pain is fine. You can't Keep numbing yourself with distractions, routines, and empty affirmations. The illusion begins to crack, and with it, your comfort in suffering. This is why people cling to broken systems, to dead-end jobs, to toxic relationships. Not because they're lazy, not because they're weak, but because staying in pain feels safer than risking disappointment. There's a phrase for this: learned helplessness. It's what happens when you've been hurt so many times that you stop believing escape is possible. Even when the door is wide open, you sit in your cage, convinced it's locked. Your mind becomes your prison, whispering that trying is pointless, that nothing will change. So you stay, and you suffer. But at least it's a suffering you know. But here's the brutal truth. Familiar pain still kills you. Slowly, it dulls your instincts. It blunts your potential. It robs you of time, energy, and possibility. Every day spent in familiar misery is a day stolen from who you could become. It's a trade certainty for freedom, and the cost is everything you could have been. There's another reason we cling to what hurts: control. When you know your pain, you feel in charge of it. It doesn't surprise you. It becomes part of your identity. You wear it like armor. Changing means vulnerability. It means letting go of control, stepping into situations where you might fail, be judged or worse, be seen, truly seen. Without the mask of coping, without the shield of suffering. And deep down, you're terrified of that exposure, terrified of being unmasked, of being raw, of being real. Because real demands responsibility. It's easier to say, I can't, than I won't. Easier to say, it's just who I am, than I'm afraid to change. Familiar pain gives you an alibi, a way to avoid the mirror. But change drags you to the mirror and forces you to look. And what you see there might shatter you, but it might also rebuild you. This is the part no one tells you. Change isn't just painful, it's grief. You grieve the life you settled for, the person you pretended to be, the safety you never really had. Change is the death of comfort, but it's also the birth of something deeper: alignment. Not happiness, not constant joy, but integrity, wholeness. The sense that you are finally living a life that makes sense, even when it's hard. So ask yourself, what are you choosing every day? Familiar pain or the courage to change? Because the pain will always be there, but only one of those paths leads anywhere new. Only one of those paths gives you a chance at something real. The other just loops endlessly back into itself, comfortable, predictable, and slowly consuming you. You're having a bad day. You spill coffee on yourself, your boss barely acknowledges you, and your partner forgot something important again. But then, out of nowhere, a stranger says something kind. Maybe they compliment your eyes. Maybe they praise your work. It's small, brief, and barely personal. And yet, everything shifts. The cloud lifts. The red flags you were holding suddenly look a little pink. This is the trap. Compliments are powerful, not because they validate truth, but because they bypass logic. They go straight to your need to be seen, to be valued, to be wanted. And when someone gives you that feeling, even once, your brain starts rewriting their entire character. You want to believe they're good, so you do. The psychological mechanism is called the halo effect. When we notice one positive trait, our mind assumes a whole constellation of virtues, one kind word, and suddenly they're kind, smart, trustworthy, worth your time, worth your forgiveness, worth your sacrifice. Even when the evidence says otherwise. This is why manipulators often start with charm. They know how to hook you. A well-placed compliment disarms suspicion. It triggers oxytocin, the bonding chemical. Your defenses drop. You interpret their attention as safety. But attention isn't affection. Praise isn't proof. A compliment isn't a character reference. It's a lure. Imagine someone toxic in your life. Maybe they lie. Maybe they guilt you. Maybe they disappear when you need them most. And yet, when they smile and tell you you're special, your brain plays defense for them. You say things like, they mean well, they're just going through something. They're not that bad. You're not being naive. You're being human. Compliments hit you in a place logic can't reach. You don't fact-check kindness. You feel it, and that feeling, it makes you rewrite history. You ignore the lies. You rationalize the betrayal. You downplay the discomfort. Because that one time, they made you feel like you mattered. This isn't just interpersonal. It's everywhere. Politicians flatter their base while quietly passing harmful policies. Companies praise your loyalty while underpaying your labor. Influencers compliment their audience while selling products that make them miserable. And we let it happen because we're desperate for recognition. Here's the unsettling truth. People crave validation more than truth. We don't just want to be right. We want to be liked while being right. And when someone offers us that approval, even artificially, we overlook the fine print. We excuse their flaws. We silence our instincts. We betray ourselves, all for a hit of warmth that never lasts. This is why abusive relationships are so confusing. Because after the yelling, there's the apology. After the betrayal, there's the compliment. And part of you clings to that kindness, like proof that the cruelty was an accident. But it wasn't. It was a cycle. And the compliment wasn't a cure. It was bait. A well-placed compliment creates cognitive dissonance. You know something's wrong, but you also feel appreciated. Your brain can't hold both at once, so it chooses the one that hurts less. It chooses the lie. Over time, that lie becomes a story where you're the lucky one, the chosen one, the one they complimented. Even as they chip away at your dignity. This is why cult leaders smile more than they scream. Why manipulative bosses offer praise before piling on more work. Why toxic partners say you're amazing right after gaslighting you. It's not random, it's strategic. Compliments aren't kindness, they're camouflage. So what do? Start by noticing the pattern. Ask yourself, does this praise come with expectations? Does it erase a red flag? Does it make me ignore something I already knew? Then pause. Because recognition is a drug, but clarity is a cure. You deserve kindness, yes, but not at the price of your sanity. You deserve compliments, but not as consolation prizes for being mistreated. You deserve to be seen, but not through the fog of manipulation. The truth is, one compliment can make you ignore 10 red flags. But it only works if you let it. Imagine you're remembering your childhood home. You can see the wallpaper, smell the kitchen, even feel the worn fabric of the couch you used to sit on. But here's the unsettling question. How much of that is real, and how much of it is a reconstruction, pieced together, not for accuracy, but for comfort? Memory isn't a recording. It's a story your brain tells. And like any good storyteller, it knows its audience. Not the unfiltered, brutally honest version of you, but the version you need to believe in. The version that lets you sleep at night. Because the truth is, your memories don't exist to preserve reality. They exist to preserve your identity. You remember what flatters you. You forget what shames you. And when shame breaks through, your mind edits the footage just enough to keep the story coherent. Just enough to protect a fragile sense of who you think you are. Let's say you wronged someone. Years later, you remember the argument, but not the way your voice shook with rage. You remember the disagreement, but not the cruelty you slipped in, like poison. You remember feeling misunderstood, not manipulative. Over time, your mind smooths the edges. shifts the angles, turns you from villain to victim without you even noticing. This isn't a bug, it's the system working perfectly. Because to confront your full history, unfiltered, unflinching, would tear a hole in the self you've carefully constructed. Your ego is a castle built from curated fragments. The moment memory stops protecting it, the whole thing starts to crack. And here's the twist. The more intelligent you are, the more skilled you become at this selective editing. Smarter minds craft better lies, suppler, more convincing. You start believing the polished version so deeply, the original gets buried. This isn't just personal, it's cultural. Entire nations remember only what flatters them. War crimes fade into strategic victories. Oppression becomes progress. Generational trauma is wrapped in nostalgia and sold as tradition. We build myths, not histories. Not because we don't know the truth, but because the truth is inconvenient to who we want to be. Even your trauma isn't immune. You'd think pain would make memories sharper, more reliable. But trauma fractures time. It shuffles events, hides pieces, sometimes erases them entirely. Not to protect the truth, but to keep you functional. You can't heal what you don't remember, but sometimes you can't survive what you do. Memory is triage. It decides what you're allowed to know based on what you can handle. And that's terrifying, because it means you can't trust yourself. You remember the version of your life that justifies your choices. You forgive yourself too easily for some things and not enough for others. Guilt gets minimized or magnified, depending on which one keeps your ego intact. This is why people stay in toxic cycles. Why abusers become martyrs in their own stories. Why victims blame themselves long after the scars have faded. Memory is the ego's lawyer. Its job isn't to uncover the truth. It's to defend your self-image at all costs. Think about the relationships you ended, the jobs you left, the people you hurt or helped. Your mind's version of those moments has been filtered through layers of regret, justification, pride, fear. The final cut you play in your head has more to do with who you need to be today than what actually happened back then. And yet, you cling to these memories like anchors. You say, "I remember it clearly," as if that means anything, as if clarity equals truth. But your mind rewrites the script every time you recall it. Each memory is a copy of a copy of a copy, degraded and altered, shaped not by events, but by emotions. So what does that mean for you? It means self-awareness isn't about remembering better, it's about questioning deeper. It's asking, what am I not remembering? Because it hurts. Or worse, what am I remembering that never actually happened? Real growth starts when you stop treating your memories as facts and start seeing them as narratives, crafted, convenient, and often false. Because the past doesn't haunt you. The story you've told yourself about it does. And if you're brave enough to strip that story down, to expose the raw, unsanitized truth beneath, you'll find something terrifying, but also something freeing. Not the person you pretend to be, not the one your memories protect, but the one who's finally ready to wake up. You're walking through life wearing armor you didn't know you put on. Not metal plates or shields, but a psychological shell built from distractions, comforts and quiet, habitual denial. Every time something painful surfaces, stress, shame, fear, you flinch, you pull back. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later. And in that moment, without realizing it, you tighten the trap. Discomfort isn't the enemy. Avoiding it is. We're trained from an early age to dodge anything that feels even remotely unpleasant. A bad grade, blame the teacher. A failed relationship, blame the other person. A feeling of emptiness, scroll, stream, snack, sleep. Anything but stop and sit in the silence. Anything but look directly at what hurts. Because discomfort feels like danger, and danger means pain. But here's the paradox. The more you run from discomfort, the more power it gains over you. Think of anxiety like a barking dog. You try to ignore it. You walk the long way around. You never make eye contact. And slowly the dog grows bolder. It chases you more often. It barks louder. You built your whole routine around avoiding that dog, and still it haunts you. But what if you turned around? What if you faced it? Even once. That's how fear works. The less you engage with it, the more control it has. The more you avoid the sting, the more you start living your life around not feeling it. Avoidance rewires your brain. It trains you to see every difficult moment as a threat, not something to overcome, but something to hide from. And hiding has a cost. You lose access to growth, to courage, to clarity. You lose the lessons buried inside the struggle. Let's get even darker. Avoiding discomfort isn't just passive, it actively makes your life worse. Say you're stuck in a toxic relationship. You know it's wrong. You feel it deep in your gut. But confronting the truth means facing grief, loneliness, maybe even shame. So you stay. You convince yourself it's not that bad, that maybe it'll get better. And that lie becomes your prison. The longer you avoid the pain of leaving, the more damage you absorb, the more of yourself you lose. Until one day you barely recognize the person still holding on. Now apply that same avoidance to your career, your habits, your identity. Every time you dodge discomfort, you reinforce a belief, I can't handle this. That belief becomes a fact in your mind, and facts become fate. You don't chase the job you want. You don't say what needs to be said. You let the rot grow behind the walls because tearing them down would be messy. But ignoring the mold doesn't stop the decay. It accelerates it. The trap isn't the discomfort. The trap is pretending it's not there. Worse still, the systems around you are designed to help you avoid discomfort, not to protect you, to pacify you. Think about it. Everything from corporate advertising to political propaganda depends on keeping you emotionally sedated, comfortable enough to keep buying, working, obeying, but never so uncomfortable that you question the structure itself. Discomfort would spark rebellion, reflection, revolution. So it's filtered, blurred, softened with just enough entertainment, just enough convenience, just enough numbing to keep you functional, but not awake. And the trap gets deeper. The more you avoid emotional pain, the more pain you carry. It doesn't go away, it just hides. It leaks out as resentment, as anxiety, as rage at the wrong target. You snap at loved ones. You spiral into addictions. You sabotage yourself, all because you didn't sit with what hurt when it first knocked on your door. Here's the brutal truth. Everything you want, freedom, meaning, transformation, lives on the other side of discomfort, not in the absence of it, not after it's been resolved, right through it. You can't bypass the fire and expect to be forged. You can't hide from your shadow and still be whole. And yes, it will hurt. Growth isn't pretty. It rips things open. It demands grief, surrender, humility. But it also gives birth to strength you didn't know was possible. Every time you face what scares you, you reclaim a piece of yourself. A piece that was stolen by fear, shame, or silence. Avoiding discomfort doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you stuck. And the longer you stay stuck, the harder it becomes to move. So if you feel the walls closing in, if life feels like a loop you can't escape, ask yourself, what am I refusing to feel? What truth have I buried so deep that even I can't name it? Then listen, not to the noise outside, but to the pain inside. Because pain, when you stop avoiding it, becomes a compass. It points to what matters. It reveals what you care about. And most of all, it reminds you that you're still alive. Discomfort is not the enemy. It's the door. Walk through it before the trap becomes your home. You sit down to rest, finally. Maybe it's after a long week. Maybe just a hard day. But before your body even begins to relax, before your mind can unclench, something ugly starts to creep in. That feeling, that voice. You should be doing something. You're wasting time. You haven't earned this. Guilt. It doesn't whisper. It stabs. And suddenly rest isn't peace. It's pressure. The weight of invisible expectations you can't name but feel in your bones. You feel guilty when you rest because you've been trained to. Not accidentally, not personally, systematically. From the moment you were old enough to understand value, your worth began to get tied to output. Gold stars, grades, chores done right. Good job meant you were productive. Well done meant you achieved. The idea that rest could be valuable in itself, that was never on the syllabus. So you internalized a pattern. Effort equals value. Productivity equals morality. And rest became laziness. Idleness. A moral failure dressed in pajamas. It's no coincidence. The system wants you tired. Because tired people don't revolt. Tired people don't question. Tired people comply. So the system rewards overextension, glorifies hustle, celebrates burnout as passion. You're taught to wear exhaustion like a badge, to compete in misery. Who's busiest? Who's most stressed? Who sacrifices the most? But what you're never taught is how to rest without shame. You see, guilt is a powerful tool, and it doesn't just live in your head. It's reinforced everywhere. Your job praises you when you go the extra mile, but goes quiet when you take a break. Media floods you with images of 4 a.m. workouts, 80-hour work weeks, and no days off. Motivation. Even in conversations, we flex our exhaustion like it's currency. "I'm so tired" becomes a status symbol. It signals commitment, importance, sacrifice. So when you stop, even for a moment, guilt doesn't feel irrational. It feels earned. But ask yourself this: why does your nervous system respond to stillness like a threat? Why does your body tense when you try to rest? Because guilt has replaced danger. Idleness is now a trigger. Stillness makes you feel unsafe, not because it is, but because you've been conditioned to fear what it says about you. Lazy, useless, falling behind. But let's look closer. Who benefits from this belief? Not you. The system thrives when you equate rest with guilt. Because a person who feels guilty for resting will never rest long enough to ask dangerous questions. They won't pause long enough to wonder if the rat race even leads anywhere. They won't stop to realize that constant motion might just be keeping them in place. Guilt keeps you moving. Moving keeps you quiet. Quiet keeps you compliant. This isn't just personal psychology. It's systemic design. So you fill every silence with noise. Every empty moment with tasks. Even leisure becomes performative, curated, optimized, monetized. You can't just read a book. It has to be a productivity hack. You can't just go for a walk. It has to count toward your steps. Even relaxation needs justification. But what if you didn't need a reason? What if your right to rest wasn't something you earned, but something you owned? What if rest wasn't selfish, but subversive? Because here's the truth. Rest is resistance. Rest disrupts the cycle. Rest challenges the story. Rest says, I am valuable even when I do nothing. That's dangerous. And that's powerful. Because a rested mind is clear. A rested body is strong. A rested person remembers what they deserve. And that's the thing systems fear most. People who remember their worth without needing to prove it. But reclaiming rest isn't easy, because guilt doesn't vanish. It fights back. You'll feel it, that tightening in your chest, that whisper of inadequacy. It's not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're healing. You're not lazy. You're not weak. You are detoxing from a culture that sold you exhaustion as virtue. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable, like stretching a muscle you forgot you had. But discomfort isn't danger. It's growth. So the next time you sit down and guilt rises like smoke, don't run from it. Recognize it. Call it what it is, a lie designed to keep you useful, not whole, and then rest. Anyway. Not because you've earned it, but because you never had to. Have you ever scrolled through someone else's life and felt your own start to shrink? It's subtle at first. A quick look at a vacation photo, a promotion post, a new relationship milestone. You tell yourself you're happy for them, but inside something tightens. A quiet discontent begins to bloom. Because in that moment, their life becomes a mirror, and it reflects everything you think you're missing. This is how the trap begins. You live in a world where other people's lives are curated performances. Social media isn't about sharing, it's about showcasing. Highlight reels of perfection, success, beauty, and joy. But you forget it's edited, cropped, filtered. You mistake it for reality, and suddenly your own life feels flat. It's not that you're unhappy, it's that you've been shown a version of life that's engineered to make yours feel smaller. Comparison is ancient, but technology has weaponized it. You're no longer comparing yourself to the people in your town, your neighborhood, your school. You're comparing yourself to the best moments of millions of strangers. Influencers, celebrities, classmates you haven't seen in 10 years. And every comparison becomes a quiet accusation. Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you happier? Why isn't your life like that? You start to feel like a failure, not because you've failed, but because your life doesn't look like someone else's highlight reel. And the damage goes deeper. Because this comparison doesn't just make you feel less, it makes you perform more. You start curating your own life, posting not what's true, but what looks good. You smile when you're tired. You stage joy. You filter your face, your experiences, your memories. You become part of the machine that's destroying your self-worth. It's not just insecurity, it's identity erosion. You begin to lose track of what you actually want. You chase what looks good, not what feels right. You measure your success by how others react, not how you feel. You outsource your self-worth to algorithms. And in the process, your life becomes a performance for an audience that doesn't care. You might not even notice how deep it runs, but it's there. Every time you feel that pang of jealousy, every time you edit your truth to make it more palatable, every time you scroll and feel less than. This isn't just emotion, it's design. The system profits from your dissatisfaction. Insecurity drives consumption. The more you feel lacking, the more you buy. More products, more experiences, more distractions. You chase completeness through things because everyone else seems to have found theirs. The lie is addictive, and it's profitable. But the most dangerous part isn't what it does to your bank account, it's what it does to your mind. You stop seeing your life as yours. You start narrating it from the outside, like a stranger looking in. You wonder how it would look in a post, how it would be perceived. You become hyper-aware of optics, of perception, of approval. And that inner voice, the one that used to guide you quietly, gets drowned out by the roar of comparison. You live, not to feel, but to be seen. And slowly, you stop being you. This is the cost of endless exposure to other people's lives. Not just envy, not just dissatisfaction, but disconnection from your desires, from your values, from your center. Because the more you stare at other people's stories, the more you forget to write your own. And here's the trap. You can never win the comparison game. Because someone will always have more, be more, appear more. The rules are rigged. The scoreboard is broken. And the finish line keeps moving. So the question isn't how to win. It's how to stop playing. How to reclaim your life from the performative chaos. How to find stillness in a world screaming for attention. How to feel okay being unseen, unliked, unscrolled. It starts with this. Recognize that other people's lives are not your measuring stick. Their beauty doesn't diminish yours. Their joy doesn't negate your struggle. Their success doesn't invalidate your pace. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're simply human in a system designed to make you feel otherwise. Your life is not less because someone else's looks more. It's time to remember what's real. Not what looks good. Not what impresses others, but what moves you. What grounds you. What's true when no one else is watching. Because that's your life. And it's worth living. Not for applause, not for comparison, but for you. Have you ever felt the surge of relief when someone agrees with you? That warm buzz, that quiet internal nod, as if the universe itself just confirmed your thinking. That's not logic speaking. That's your brain whispering. Agreement equals truth, but it doesn't. See, your mind isn't built to seek truth. It's built to seek belonging. Evolution prioritized survival, not accuracy. And to survive, you needed a tribe. Agreement meant safety. Disagreement meant danger. Being right was less important than being accepted. So today, when someone echoes your beliefs, it still feels like validation. It feels like truth. And that's the trap. Imagine this. You're in a room with 10 people. 9 of them say the sky is green. Even if you're sure it's blue, doubt creeps in. Maybe they see something you don't. Maybe you're wrong. That tension you feel, that's the fear of isolation. That's your brain doing exactly what it was trained to do, prioritize group cohesion over objective reality. It's called the illusion of consensus. When others agree with you, your confidence spikes. When they don't, it plummets. It doesn't matter if the agreement is informed, rational, or evidence-based. It just matters that it exists. Social media weaponizes this. Algorithms feed you agreement, not because it's true, but because it's profitable. The more validation you receive, the longer you stay, the more ads you watch, the more data you give away. You aren't learning, you're looping. Confirmation becomes currency. Dissent becomes disruption. And the echo chamber deepens. But here's where it gets darker. That sense of agreement, being truth. It doesn't just reinforce harmless opinions, it calcifies dangerous ones. Bigotry, conspiracies, pseudoscience, once surrounded by agreement, these become emboldened. They feel obviously true simply because enough people nod along. Look at cults. Look at political extremism. Look at mass delusions. They all thrive on agreement, mistaken for truth. It's not that people don't think, it's that they think in groups, and groups aren't logical. They're tribal, emotional, reactive. The more agreement, the less reflection. This is why propaganda works. Not because it's convincing, but because it's repeated. Familiarity breeds belief. The more often you hear something, the truer it feels. Your brain isn't checking evidence, it's checking frequency. 5 people say it. It must be true. 100, undeniable. But truth isn't democratic. Reality doesn't care how many people believe in it. The earth didn't become flat when millions believed it was. Smoking didn't become safe because ads said it was. And your deepest convictions aren't immune to this bias either. Even in your closest relationships, agreement soothes, disagreement unsettles. When a friend challenges your worldview, it feels like betrayal. When they validate it, it feels like intimacy. But maybe that comfort is the danger. Maybe you aren't chasing truth. Maybe you're just collecting mirrors. So ask yourself, are you seeking agreement or are you seeking understanding? Are you building beliefs on evidence or on applause? When someone nods along, do you feel informed or just affirmed? Because the moment agreement starts to feel like truth is the moment truth slips away unnoticed. Real truth is often lonely. It challenges. It isolates. It refuses to flatter. And sometimes it makes you the only person in the room saying, wait, that doesn't feel right. The question is, will you have the strength to keep saying it, even when no one nods back? You don't settle because you're satisfied. You settle because you're scared of guilt. Scared of what it would mean if you didn't settle, if you actually went after what you want and failed. Because failure brings blame, regret, and most terrifying of all, responsibility. You convince yourself that compromise is noble, that giving up your dream for something practical is maturity, that choosing the safe relationship, the stable job, the predictable life is wisdom. But deep down, you know the truth. You settled not because it was right, but because it was safe. And safe meant you could avoid feeling like a failure. We're taught from a young age that guilt is a sign of conscience. But guilt is also a weapon. It punishes desire. It makes you second-guess your ambition. It tells you that wanting more, demanding more, is selfish. That reaching too far makes you ungrateful. That you should be happy with what you have, even if what you have is quietly killing you. So you shrink yourself. You soften your edges. You trade hunger for harmony. Because if you want too much, you risk hurting others. If you reach too far, someone might feel left behind. If you succeed too loudly, you might make someone else feel small. And guilt whispers, is it worth it? This is how guilt becomes a cage. It dresses itself in the language of kindness. It masquerades as morality, but it's not guiding you, it's controlling you. Look closer at your life, the job you tolerate, the relationship you endure, the dream you abandoned before it could disappoint you. You tell yourself it's all fine, that you're being realistic, that contentment is enough, but behind that smile is a quiet ache, a voice asking, what if I didn't settle? But you silence it, because listening means reopening wounds, admitting you played it safe, confronting the truth that you traded your potential for peace of mind. Not because peace was what you truly wanted, but because it meant you wouldn't have to feel guilty if you failed. Society praises those who endure quietly, who sacrifice silently, who lower their standards in the name of gratitude. But that's not virtue, it's surrender. And the reward for surrender is applause from people who benefit from your silence. Think about that. The world doesn't reward your dreams, it rewards your compliance. It praises your ability to stay small, to not ask for too much, to not rock the boat, because settled people are manageable, predictable, safe. But underneath all that comfort, there's rot, the rot of unspoken dreams, the rot of potential never tested, the rot of a soul that's slowly forgetting what it feels like to want something fiercely. And still you cling to guilt, like it's a compass, like it's guiding you. But guilt doesn't know the way. It only knows how to pull you backward, away from risk, away from the edge where growth begins. The truth is, you settled because guilt convinced you it was the noble thing to do. But what if it's not? What if guilt has been lying to you? What if it's not noble to deny your desires, but cowardly? What if the true moral failure isn't reaching too high, but choosing to never reach at all? You don't need to feel guilty for wanting more. You don't need to apologize for refusing to settle. You were never meant to shrink your life to fit someone else's comfort zone. The next time guilt whispers, be careful, you need to shout back. Be bold. Because the only thing worse than the guilt of failing is the emptiness of never trying. You're sitting at your desk, hours after the argument is over. But it's not over. Not really. Not in your mind. The words loop. The tone, the way they looked at you, what you could have said, what you should have said. Again and again, the fight plays like a film with no ending, a reel you can't stop spinning. And maybe you tell yourself it's because you care, because it matters. But the truth is darker. You're not solving the problem, you're feeding the addiction. Your brain doesn't care whether it's helping you. It only cares whether it's stimulated, and nothing stimulates the brain quite like a good argument, especially one where you were hurt, misunderstood, or blindsided. That cocktail of injustice and adrenaline is irresistible. It gives your brain a mission, a purpose. It keeps you mentally busy. But beneath that busyness is something hollow, something obsessive, something desperate. Replaying arguments isn't reflection, it's rumination. Rumination is what happens when thinking becomes a trap. It feels like you're making progress, like you're working toward clarity, but you're just digging deeper. Every new angle is another illusion of control. Every mental replay is a fake rehearsal for a conversation that will never happen. The fight already ended. What you're doing now is self-inflicted torment. But why does your brain want this torment? Because it's familiar. Because it gives you the illusion that you're fixing something. Because it lets you stay angry, and anger, for all its chaos, makes you feel powerful. It's the one emotion that masks pain while energizing the body. So you stay angry. You replay their words like mantras. You mentally perfect your comebacks, and all the while, you avoid the more frightening task of moving on. This isn't about healing, it's about avoiding the silence that comes after, avoiding the emptiness, avoiding the realization that you may never get closure, that some people won't understand you, that some wounds don't get apologies, that some endings don't get resolutions. Replaying arguments is your brain's way of rejecting powerlessness. But ironically, it only deepens your helplessness. You become stuck in a loop, trying to win a battle that no longer exists. You think you're defending yourself, but you're actually re-injuring yourself. Every mental replay reopens the emotional wound. The brain doesn't distinguish between memory and reality. To it, that argument is happening all over again. Your body reacts accordingly. Your heart rate rises. Your stomach tightens. Stress hormones flood your system. And the worst part, you think you're in control, but you're not. The argument is controlling you, long after the words have stopped. And this is where the addiction gets dangerous. Because once the pattern is ingrained, it doesn't stay limited to one argument. Your brain starts craving more of these loops. You'll find yourself analyzing every small conflict, every misunderstanding, every raised eyebrow. Did they mean that? Why didn't they text back? Why did they say it that way? The brain learns to obsess over social friction like a drug. Conflict becomes the new currency of thought. And the cost, peace, presence, sanity. You miss real moments. You miss sleep. You miss connection. because your mind is busy fighting ghosts, specters of past conversations that now live rent-free in your consciousness. You sacrifice the now to relive the then, again and again and again. But here's the most disturbing part. You reward yourself for it. You feel justified, righteous. You imagine your mental victory speeches. You feel smarter, stronger, sharper. But that righteousness is a trap. It convinces you to stay locked in mental combat. Because if you walk away from the argument, it feels like you're losing, like they won, like you gave up. So you stay, you stew, you spiral, until the argument becomes not just something that happened to you, but something that defines you. And slowly, without realizing it, you become addicted, not just to the argument, but to the identity it gives you. The victim, the misunderstood one, the righteous one, the one who was wronged. It's seductive. That identity simplifies things. It makes you feel in control, but it also traps you in the past. It rewrites your present, and it sabotages your future. Because the more time you spend replaying old arguments, the less time you spend writing a better story. You don't need more comebacks. You need closure. You don't need to win in your head. You need to heal in your heart. But healing can't happen while you're still at war. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to keep fighting the old battles. It's to finally let them go. Even if it means walking away without a victory, even if it means never getting the last word. Because sometimes the last word is silence, and sometimes silence is the only way to win. Imagine two people witnessing the same event, a heated argument between strangers on a crowded street. One walks away furious, convinced someone was being verbally abused. The other shrugs, thinking it was just a loud disagreement. Same facts, same moment. Two completely different realities. That's the power your feelings have. They don't just color your experience. They rewrite it. Your brain isn't a cold, rational machine. It's a storyteller. And like all good storytellers, it adapts the facts to fit the mood of the narrative. Feel scared and the world looks threatening. Feel proud, and suddenly your past decisions seem noble. Your emotions don't just respond to your perceptions, they shape them. Think about memory. We like to believe our memories are like videos, accurate recordings of the past. But they're more like paintings, filtered, edited, reinterpreted. Two siblings can remember the same childhood event entirely differently because what they felt in that moment overwrote what actually happened. Sadness emphasizes slights. Joy softens them. Guilt distorts time, stretching a single mistake into a lifetime of regret. Your mind bends history to protect you or to punish you. Have you ever revisited a past conversation and suddenly seen it in a new light? What once felt like a harmless joke now feels like a subtle insult. Or the opposite, what seemed like rejection now feels like concern. It's not that the facts changed, you did. Your feelings shifted and your memory followed. This isn't a glitch, it's a feature. Your brain prioritizes emotional truth over factual accuracy because survival depends more on how you feel than on what actually happened. If you feel threatened, your body prepares for danger, even if the threat isn't real. If you feel loved, you'll trust, even if that trust is misplaced. Emotion trumps information, every time. And this goes deeper than memory. Consider moral judgment. When you're angry at someone, their smallest mistake feels like a major betrayal. But when you love them, you excuse almost anything. Same action, different verdict. Your feelings act as the judge, jury, and executioner, rewriting the script to match the mood. This is why apologies often fail, because truth isn't shared, it's felt. One person may genuinely feel remorse. The other may feel mocked. The words don't matter as much as the emotional lens through which they're heard. And if you don't share that lens, you don't share reality. Your emotions even affect your perception of time. Depression slows everything down. Minutes feel like hours. Excitement does the opposite. Hours vanish in minutes. When you're anxious, the future looks chaotic. When you're content, it looks manageable. Time itself warps, not because it changes, but because your feelings do. Even identity isn't safe. Who you believe you are, strong, weak, capable, broken, isn't a fixed truth. It's a story told by your emotions. Confidence tells you you're a leader. Shame insists you're a fraud. Your sense of self shifts with your mood, leaving you clinging to labels that feel true, but often aren't. And this rewriting happens constantly. You justify decisions you once questioned. You reinterpret betrayals to protect your pride. You see patterns that were never there, simply because your mind needs the comfort of coherence. Your feelings write the first draft of reality, and then pretend it was always the truth. This is why facts rarely change minds. When someone believes something deeply, whether political, personal, or philosophical, it's not just because of evidence. It's because their belief aligns with how they feel. Try to correct them with facts, and you threaten their emotional foundation. They don't resist because they're irrational. They resist because you're challenging their internal reality. So if you're searching for truth, you can't just chase facts. You have to interrogate your feelings. Ask why you want something to be true. What comfort it gives. What fear it protects you from. Because until you do, your emotions will keep quietly editing the world around you, shaping what you see, what you remember, and who you think you are. Feelings rewrite facts, not just sometimes, not just for other people, but for you, every day. And unless you're aware of it, you'll mistake the edits for truth. You'll trust memories that lie. You'll defend beliefs built on fear. You'll mistake emotional narratives for objective reality. The mind is not a camera, it's a courtroom. And your feelings are the judge. You were never supposed to become this version of yourself. This constantly alert, tightly coiled, ever-vigilant version, but survival demanded it. And slowly, inch by inch, it rewired your identity. At first it was temporary, a necessary mindset to get through a crisis. Maybe it was poverty, abuse, betrayal, a relentless series of disappointments. Whatever it was, it cracked you open and whispered one rule: stay ready or you'll be destroyed. So you adjusted. You got sharper, colder. You learned to scan every room, every voice, every intention. You stopped hoping for safety and started preparing for danger. At some point, survival mode became your norm, and now you don't know how to turn it off. You call it being careful. You say you're just cautious, just observant. But the truth is darker. You're exhausted, anxious, always waiting for the next blow. You don't relax. You brace. Every silence feels loaded. Every smile feels suspicious. Every moment of peace feels like bait in a trap. Survival mode doesn't just affect how you think, it changes how you love. You struggle to trust. You scan texts for subtext. You watch faces for signs of betrayal. You question kindness. You expect abandonment. Relationships become battlegrounds where you're preparing to be left before you're ever fully seen. You want closeness, but you don't believe in it. You crave love, but only in the safest, most controlled doses, because vulnerability. That's a risk you were taught never pays off. But here's the paradox. Survival mode kept you alive. It protected you. It taught you how to read danger, how to outlast cruelty, how to function in chaos. It made you a master of endurance. But endurance isn't living. It's bracing. It's delaying. It's surviving instead of thriving. You've mistaken alertness for wisdom. You think your hypervigilance is insight, that your anxiety is intuition, that your inability to rest is proof of strength. But these are not gifts. These are scars. And your mind, trying to protect you, doesn't realize the war is over. Or maybe it's not over. Maybe the world still feels unsafe because you never had the chance to heal. You never had the moment to tell your nervous system, "We're not in danger anymore." And so your body keeps ringing the alarm bells, even in silence, especially in silence, because silence, to someone in survival mode, is never peace. It's the calm before the next betrayal. It's the space where danger hides, so you fill it with noise, with tasks, with worry, with chaos. You don't know how to exist without it. And when things go well, that's when you're most anxious. Because survival mode taught you that good moments are setups, that something bad always follows happiness. So you sabotage, you withdraw, you create problems where none exist, not because you want to suffer, but because suffering feels more familiar than peace. And that's the deepest tragedy. Survival mode is meant to be a response, but you've turned it into an identity. It's not just how you operate, it's who you think you are. You don't even remember the version of yourself before this. The version who dreamed freely, who laughed without flinching, who could love without armor. And yet, that version of you isn't dead. It's buried, trapped under layers of instinct and protection, waiting for permission to resurface. But here's the hard truth. It won't come back until you make space for it, which means you'll have to grieve. You'll have to mourn the years you spent surviving instead of living. You'll have to admit how tired you really are, and you'll have to face a terrifying question. Who am I when I'm not in survival mode? Because if survival became your personality, then healing will feel like a death of vigilance, a death of control, a death of the constant need to scan for danger. But in that death, something else is born: presence, safety, joy, love, rest, things you've forgotten how to feel, things you've maybe never truly felt at all. So the question isn't whether survival mode helped you. It did. The question is, are you still willing to let it run your life? Because you can't be fully alive while you're bracing for death. And deep down, you already know it's time to stop surviving and start becoming someone else entirely. Someone who doesn't just endure the world, but belongs in it. Imagine this. You've been starving, not for food, but for attention, affection, acknowledgement. You grew up learning to see breadcrumbs as banquets. A delayed text message becomes love. A backhanded compliment becomes validation. An occasional glance your way becomes a sign that you matter. And the worst part, you believe it. You cling to it. You wait. This is the trap. This is the mind cage that's built not out of steel bars, but of hope, nostalgia, and desperation. You were taught somewhere, somehow, that being loved means being patient, that real love is earned through endurance, that if you just hold on long enough, the person ignoring you will finally notice. The person hurting you will change. That silence is just a pause before affection, but it never is. You mistake neglect for mystery. You interpret coldness as depth. You romanticize suffering because to face the truth that you're being starved is too painful, too final, so you turn crumbs into rituals. You worship them. You wait days for a one-word reply. You replay half-hearted compliments like sacred hymns. You build an entire emotional life out of scraps. And in doing so, you disappear. You lose the ability to recognize real love, consistent, warm, freely given, because it feels foreign. It feels suspicious. Real love isn't a puzzle to solve. It isn't a game of decoding. It doesn't keep you in suspense. But you've been rewired to believe that love must hurt, that it must be unpredictable, that your worth is proved by how much pain you can endure without leaving. You don't chase affection, you chase resolution. You want the story to end differently. You want the person who broke you to be the one who fixes you. But that never happens. They give just enough to keep you from walking away, just enough to make you question your instincts, just enough to keep you addicted. This is not love. This is conditioning. You were conditioned to seek approval from people who never planned to give it. You were taught that your feelings are excessive, your needs are burdens, your standards are unrealistic. You learn to apologize for wanting more than the bare minimum. And over time, you stopped asking. You convince yourself you're strong for staying, that you're loyal, that you see something others don't. But the truth is darker. You're afraid. Afraid that if you leave, no one else will ever offer you even those crumbs. Afraid that this emptiness is as good as it gets, so you settle. You call inconsistency mystery. You call indifference independence. You call emotional starvation strength. And you wait. God, you wait. For texts that never come. For apologies that are always implied but never spoken. But here's the question you've been avoiding. How much longer are you willing to wait for someone to love you properly? Another week? Another year? Another decade? Because the longer you wait, the more your identity fuses with this starvation. You stop recognizing yourself. You become someone who accepts less. Not because that's who you are, but because you forgot what more even looks like. Stay. And what if you never get it? What if the person you're waiting on never changes, never wakes up, never sees you? What if they already do, and just don't care? It's brutal, yes, but it's freeing too, because once you see the crumbs for what they are, you can finally stop waiting for the feast. You can walk away from the table that's never fed you. You can stop mistaking starvation for discipline and denial for devotion. You deserve full meals. You deserve to be loved without auditioning for it. You deserve presence, not puzzles. Clarity, not chaos. Love that shows up, not love that makes you guess. The crumbs will never become bread, no matter how long you wait, no matter how much you love. And if you keep waiting, it won't just be your heart that's hungry. It'll be your soul that starves, your life that passes. Stop calling it love. It's deprivation, it's addiction, and the only thing it feeds is your illusion. You crave peace, not just the absence of noise, but real peace, the kind that quiets your nerves and loosens your jaw. But somehow, every time you reach for it, guilt creeps in, as if needing peace is a sign of weakness, as if stepping back means you've failed. You've been taught to earn peace, to fight for it, to deserve it only after suffering, striving, sacrificing. In a world that glorifies hustle, needing rest feels like betrayal, like laziness, draped in soft excuses. You sit alone for a moment, trying to breathe, and some part of you whispers, shouldn't you be doing something? That voice is not your own. It's the system whispering through your conscience, a system that equates stillness with worthlessness, that makes your productivity the price of your belonging. So you keep moving, keep giving, keep proving. You fill your days with obligations, your nights with guilt, and your mind with noise. Because if you stop, if you really stop, what might you hear? Maybe you'd hear the truth, that you're tired, not just tired from today, but from the weight of expectations stacked across years. Expectations to please, to perform, to persist, no matter the cost. You weren't born thinking peace was selfish. That was programmed into you, drip-fed through applause when you overachieved. Reinforced every time someone said you're so strong, when what they meant was you suffer silently. They never told you that the need for peace was holy, that seeking it is not escape, but return. Return to yourself before you were split into versions for work, family, friends, before your value was tied to output. But there's a trap here, a trap so subtle you barely notice it. When you try to rest, the guilt intensifies. You feel bad for being unavailable. You feel bad for being less productive. You even feel bad for feeling bad. And so the peace you're craving becomes yet another battlefield, another space where your mind wages war against itself. This is not a personal failing. It's strategic conditioning. Because people who constantly question their right to peace don't ask bigger questions. They don't organize. They don't rebel. They're too busy justifying their right to breathe. It's easier to control people who think inner calm must be negotiated. So the system rewards those who burn out quietly, the always on, always available, always apologizing. You're taught that worth is earned through exhaustion, that sacrifice is noble, and that boundaries are optional if someone else needs you badly enough. You've become fluent in the language of guilt. Even your silence apologizes. And yet, you still long for peace. Not because you're broken, but because something inside you still remembers what it feels like to be whole. Here's the radical truth. Peace is not a reward. It is not a trophy you win after pain. It is not something you have to justify. Peace is your birthright. But reclaiming it means you will have to disappoint someone. You will have to say no. You will have to stop apologizing. You will have to accept that your value does not increase with your suffering. And that terrifies the part of you that was raised to please. Still, you must try, because the alternative is worse. A life spent performing, pacifying, and pretending. A life where you abandon yourself for the comfort of others. The real betrayal isn't needing peace. It's believing you're unworthy of it. So next time you feel that tug of guilt when you rest, when you breathe, when you say not today, remember that guilt is not your conscience. It's your conditioning, and you can refuse it. You don't need a reason to rest. You don't need permission to be quiet. You don't need to be broken to step away. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not selfish. You are simply remembering what it means to be whole. You were only a child. You didn't have the vocabulary to understand it, but you felt it. Every insult wasn't just a word, it was a brick, heavy, blunt, and permanent, laid carefully, one by one, until they built a house inside your head. A house you never meant to live in, but somehow you never moved out. At first, they were just voices. A parent in a bad mood, a teacher with too many students and too little patience, a classmate looking for someone to target. They said things like, "You're so lazy. You'll never amount to anything," or the classic, "What's wrong with you?" At the time, it stung, but you brushed it off. Or so you thought. Because something happens when you hear the same story enough times. You start believing it's yours. This is how someone else's insult becomes your self-talk. At first, you resist. You argue back in your head. You tell yourself they're wrong. But repetition has a way of wearing down resistance. It seeps into the silence, into the pauses, into the moments when you're alone and things go wrong. Suddenly that voice returns, not in their tone, but in yours. You start saying it to yourself. "I always mess things up. I'm not good enough. They're just being nice. I don't really deserve it." These aren't facts, they're echoes. Echoes of a script you didn't write, but keep performing. And what's worse, you don't even realize the performance is still going, because it feels like truth. The voice has changed costume. It no longer sounds like the abuser. It sounds like you. This is the most sinister trick of psychological conditioning. When oppression becomes internalized. When the jailer leaves the cell, but you keep the door locked yourself. Not because you're weak, but because somewhere along the line, someone taught you that freedom wasn't meant for people like you. Let's be clear, this isn't about being dramatic or oversensitive. This is about the architecture of identity, about how language, repeated in the right conditions, becomes reality. Your neural pathways don't care if something is kind or cruel. They care if it's familiar, and familiarity, tragically, feels like safety. So you repeat the same patterns. You shrink from opportunities. You sabotage relationships. You beat yourself to the punch, criticizing yourself before anyone else can. And here's the real tragedy. The people who hurt you. They don't have to be in your life anymore. Their work is done. They've left you with a version of yourself that does the job for them. But now comes the hardest part. You might recognize this pattern and still defend it. You'll say, but it's true, I am lazy. I am difficult. I do mess things up. Because challenging these beliefs doesn't just threaten your worldview. It threatens your identity. You've built a self around being not enough. Around being the problem. And to imagine that's false, it's terrifying. Because it means your entire life may have been lived through the eyes of someone else's cruelty. So you stay. Not because it's right, but because it's known. But ask yourself this. Who benefits from you believing those things? Who gets to win when you stay small, when you stay quiet, when you stay in a prison that doesn't even have a guard? Not you. The only thing keeping those voices alive is your permission. And no, it's not easy. You don't erase decades of conditioning with a mantra or a motivational quote. But you start by recognizing the voice. By asking, whose words are these really? You'll find they don't sound like you. Not the real you. The you before the fear. The you before the shame. That's the voice you have to resurrect. Start small. Catch yourself mid-insult. Pause. Question it. Redirect. And most importantly, replace it. Not with empty positivity, but with truth. With gentleness. With a tone you would use on someone you love. Because that's what you are. Worth loving. Worth healing. Worth hearing your own voice again. Uncorrupted, untwisted, and finally, yours. You are only a child. But you're not anymore. Now you get to decide what you believe. Now you get to rewrite the script. Not with the language of wounds, but with the language of worth. You're at dinner with friends. The conversation turns awkward. Someone suggests a plan you don't like. Maybe it's expensive, inconvenient, or just plain exhausting. You want to say no. You should say no. But instead, you smile and say, sure? Just like that, you've betrayed yourself. And why? To avoid a ripple. To avoid tension. You think you're keeping the peace. But what you're really doing is quietly abandoning yourself. This is what people don't understand about people pleasing. It's not politeness. It's not kindness. It's fear. It's fear of disapproval. Fear of confrontation. Fear of discomfort. You say yes, not because you want to, but because the idea of saying no triggers something deeper. An ancient panic. A flash of anxiety that says, if I upset them, I'll lose them. If I cause conflict, I'll be rejected. But here's the trap. Every yes you say to avoid tension builds a life you don't want. You agree to things you resent. You tolerate things that exhaust you. You smile when you want to scream. And little by little, you disappear. You disappear behind a mask of agreeableness. It starts small, letting someone cut in line, laughing at a joke you didn't find funny, going to an event you never wanted to attend. These moments seem harmless, but they add up. They train your nervous system to associate authenticity with danger and compliance with safety. Until one day you realize you're not living your life, you're surviving other people's expectations. And the world rewards this. Society teaches you that keeping the peace is noble, that going along with the group is mature, that avoiding conflict is virtuous. But who benefits from this? Not you. The less you speak up, the easier you are to manage. The less you resist, the more you're used. You're being conditioned, gently, constantly, to conflate obedience with goodness. Think about your workplace. When was the last time you said yes to something that made you want to crawl out of your skin? An extra project, an unreasonable deadline, an after-hours commitment. You agreed because it was easier, because you didn't want to seem difficult, because rocking the boat might make people think less of you. But here's the thing. Every time you say yes to avoid tension, you reinforce the belief that your comfort matters less than other people's approval. And that belief spreads like a virus into your friendships, into your relationships, into how you parent, into how you show up in the world. You say yes so many times that eventually you forget how to say no. You forget you even have the right to. Until all that's left is a hollow version of you, amiable, reliable, exhausted. Now ask yourself, who would you be if you weren't afraid to say no? What would your life look like if you tolerated tension, sat in the discomfort, and honored your own truth over harmony? What friendships would survive? What relationships would end? What parts of your identity would finally breathe? Because the truth is, tension is not the enemy. It's a signal, a guide, a line that marks where you end and someone else begins. Avoiding tension doesn't make you safe. It makes you invisible, and nothing will drain your soul faster than betraying yourself just to keep things smooth on the surface. You're not meant to be agreeable. You're meant to be whole. And sometimes wholeness sounds like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Sometimes it looks like leaving a conversation, canceling a commitment, disappointing someone you love, not because you don't care, but because you finally do, about you. It's time to stop seeing conflict as failure. Conflict is honesty. Tension is clarity. Saying no isn't a rejection of others. It's a declaration of self. And if that upsets people, so be it. You were never born to be easy to be around. You were born to be real. So the next time you feel that urge to say yes, just to keep the peace, pause, breathe. Ask yourself who pays the price for this yes, and what would it cost to finally choose you? Because the world doesn't need more agreeable people. It needs more honest ones, starting with you. You ever notice how silence can feel unbearable? Not because anything's wrong, but because nothing is happening. The room is still. No drama, no chaos, no distractions. And yet your mind starts to itch, like something's missing. You fidget, you check your phone, you reach for noise, anything to fill the stillness. This is where the trap begins. Because deep down, you've been taught, conditioned to mistake peace for boredom. Think about it. From an early age, your brain has been wired to equate stimulation with meaning. Lights flashing, notifications buzzing, voices shouting. Our culture glorifies the constant. We've built a life around noise, movement, adrenaline. It feels alive. Stillness feels like something's wrong. Peace becomes suspicious. Boredom becomes dangerous. But what if boredom isn't a failure of your environment, but a failure of your attention? What if peace feels empty, not because it lacks value, but because you've lost the ability to sit with it? Your nervous system is addicted to chaos. You've been trained to need it. Your brain craves highs and lows, peaks and drops, constant variation. When nothing's wrong, when there's no conflict to fix or fire to put out, a deep discomfort rises. It's not anxiety, it's absence. And that absence feels unbearable. So you run. You chase toxic relationships because at least they're exciting. You pick fights. You scroll endlessly, not out of interest, but out of panic. You self-sabotage peace because the silence screams too loudly, and that's the sinister part. You think you're chasing happiness, but you're just avoiding stillness, because peace forces you to face yourself. Without noise, you hear your thoughts. Without distraction, you feel your emptiness. Without drama, you see your patterns. And some part of you would rather be miserable than aware. So you call it boredom. But it's not. It's presence. The truth is, peace isn't boring. Peace is raw. Peace is naked. Peace doesn't sedate you. It confronts you. It demands that you be with yourself. Without performance, without stimulation, without escape. And most people can't handle that. We crave resolution, but we reject the stillness it brings. Ever notice how people will sabotage a good thing? Leave healthy relationships. Start pointless arguments. Stir up problems that don't exist. It's not always because they're irrational. It's because their nervous system doesn't recognize peace as familiar. Chaos is familiar. Dysfunction is familiar. Noise is comforting in its predictability. But peace feels foreign, and anything foreign feels dangerous. So we create conflict, not because we love drama, but because we hate stillness. And here's the deepest irony. The very thing we long for is the one thing we reject when it finally arrives. We say we want peace, but we treat it like a threat. Because peace reveals everything. The noise kept hidden, your loneliness, your regrets, your buried shame, your lack of direction, the quiet truths you've been drowning in stimulation to avoid. That's why peace hurts, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. Boredom isn't the enemy, it's a signal. It's your mind telling you there's something unprocessed, unspoken, unresolved, something you've been silencing with motion. And now in the stillness, it speaks. So the next time you feel bored, pause, don't run, don't reach for distraction. Sit in it. Ask, what am I really feeling? Ask, what am I trying to escape? Because that boredom might just be the doorway to your own inner world, to healing, to clarity, to truth. But only if you're brave enough to stop mistaking peace for emptiness. Peace is not the absence of life, it's the presence of yourself. And until you can sit in peace without needing to break it, you'll never stop creating the chaos you claim to hate. Have you ever had a thought so vivid it felt like action? Like the very act of obsessively imagining every possibility, every outcome was somehow doing the thing itself. That's the illusion of overthinking. It seduces you into paralysis by disguising itself as productivity. You sit there replaying a conversation, a choice, a mistake, again and again. You analyze the tone of a message, the implication of a word, the shadow of a glance. You build elaborate mental simulations, trying to predict every angle, every consequence, every response. And it feels like movement. It feels like you're preparing, like you're gaining control, but you're not. Overthinking is the cognitive version of running on a treadmill. You're moving, yes, but never forward. You're sweating, straining, exhausting yourself, and getting nowhere. The mind rewards this illusion. It gives you tiny hits of satisfaction every time you think. Maybe I'm closer to figuring it out. It releases tension temporarily, lulling you into comfort, because thinking feels safer than acting, safer than deciding, safer than risking being wrong. This is why overthinking isn't a flaw of intelligence. It's a defense mechanism. It's your brain trying to outmaneuver uncertainty. And in a world that punishes mistakes, that worships perfection, that judges quickly and forgives slowly, no wonder your mind chooses thought over action. But here's the catch. Thought without action is just a cage made of clarity. It looks transparent, logical, but it holds you just the same. You rehearse the breakup speech, but never say it. You strategize the career change, but never send the application. You think about the apology, the confrontation, the dream, but always tomorrow. Always when the timing is better. Always, once I'm sure. You tell yourself it's wise to wait, that you're being responsible, thoughtful, even mature. But really, you're afraid. Afraid of the irreversible. Afraid of the unknown. Afraid of failure, of committing to a path and realizing too late it was the wrong one. And so overthinking becomes your shield, your sanctuary. You think to protect yourself from the pain of life's collisions. But what if overthinking is the collision? What if the very thing you use to avoid pain is what's causing it? Because here's the brutal truth. Every moment you spend overthinking is a moment you're not living. The job you didn't apply for, the relationship you didn't repair, the truth you didn't speak. All lost in the fog of mental rehearsal. Overthinking replaces reality with potentiality. It fills your life, not with what is, but what could be. And the more time you spend in that false future, the more disconnected you become from the present, the only place you actually have power. It's not that thinking is bad, it's that it has a purpose, and that purpose isn't to replace living. Thinking is meant to prepare you for action, not protect you from it. So how do you break the cycle? Start by recognizing that certainty is a myth, that clarity comes from doing, not planning, that no amount of mental rehearsal can replicate the messiness of real experience. Accept that you will never be 100% ready. That fear doesn't mean stop, it means proceed with awareness. That courage is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to move anyway. And most of all, understand this. Overthinking feels like doing something because it mimics effort. It mirrors struggle, but it's a counterfeit currency. It spends your time, your energy, your potential, and gives you nothing in return. Your thoughts are not your actions. Your plans are not your progress. Your fears are not your fate. You don't need another hour to think. You need 5 seconds to act. Because while you're busy simulating every scenario, life is moving forward, with or without you. And one day, you'll realize the tragedy wasn't that you chose the wrong path. It's that you never chose at all. You were never told to dim your light. No one sat you down and demanded you become smaller, quieter, less ambitious. It was more subtle than that. A glance that lingered too long when you spoke up. The joke that stung a little more than it should have. A compliment that came with a condition. You're so smart for a woman. You're so confident. But maybe tone it down. And over time you adjusted. Not because you were weak, but because you were trying to survive. You shrink to make others comfortable. That's the trap. At first it's almost invisible. You soften your tone in meetings. You downplay your achievements so no one feels threatened. You let others interrupt, override, correct you. Not because they're right, but because they're louder. You become an expert at second-guessing yourself before anyone else gets the chance. But why? Why would someone willingly surrender space, presence, power? Because you've been trained, carefully, methodically, to believe that your strength is dangerous, that your brilliance is intimidating, that taking up space is somehow an act of aggression. And in a society where politeness is valued more than truth, where compliance is mistaken for kindness, your self-erasure becomes a form of social etiquette. You convince yourself it's empathy. You don't want to make others uncomfortable. You don't want to seem arrogant or overbearing. You just want to be liked, accepted, welcomed. But acceptance built on self-abandonment is not belonging, it's performance. A performance you've been giving for so long, you don't even realize you're acting anymore. And here's the most insidious part. The world rewards you for it. You get praise for being easy to work with, applause for being humble, promotions for being reliable, but never visionary. You're the support beam in someone else's skyscraper, the reliable fallback, the backup plan, but never the lead, never the headline. Because when you shrink, you make room for others to expand, and those who benefit from your absence will never encourage your presence. You learn to laugh at jokes that cut deep, to smile when you're dismissed, to pretend no problem when it's always a problem. You become fluent in silence, in swallowing your needs, in disappearing just enough to be tolerable. Your existence becomes palatable, but only in pieces. And eventually you begin to believe that your full self is too much. You edit your personality like a script. Cut the lines that might offend, mute the parts that demand attention. Dim the colors so you don't outshine the scenery. You become smaller, quieter, safer, until one day you realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. The tragedy isn't just the loss of your voice. It's the fact that you were never too loud. They were simply too uncomfortable with your volume. You never needed to change. You were never the problem. So what happens when you stop shrinking? At first it feels like rebellion. Speaking up feels like shouting. Setting boundaries feels like betrayal. You'll be called difficult, arrogant, selfish, and you'll start to doubt yourself, because that doubt is how the trap keeps working. But if you push through it, something shifts. You reclaim space, not at someone else's expense, but because it was always yours to begin with. You rediscover your voice, not as an echo of others' expectations, but as the raw, unfiltered sound of your truth. And then the real challenge begins. Because as you grow, some people will leave. The ones who only knew how to love your absence will not know how to handle your presence. Let them go. They were never really with you. They were with the version of you that kept them comfortable. You'll find others, people who aren't threatened by your voice, who don't flinch at your brilliance, who celebrate the fact that you take up space unapologetically. These are your people. They were waiting for you to stop hiding. But most importantly, you will meet yourself again. Not the version of you that fit into everyone else's mold, but the one you buried under layers of not too much. The one who knows she doesn't have to earn the right to exist fully. The one who is done apologizing for her own presence. You shrink to make others comfortable. But now, it's time to expand for your sake, not theirs. She said she was sorry. Her voice cracked just the right way. Her eyes welled up at just the right moment. It felt sincere, heartfelt, even you wanted to believe her. In fact, some part of you did believe her. Maybe not fully, maybe not with both feet, but enough. And for a while, it worked. You slept better that night. You let your guard down. You stopped rehearsing arguments in your head. The tension eased, replaced by a fragile peace. You told yourself things were different now, that people can change, that forgiveness means moving forward. But then, slowly, inevitably, it returned. The same dismissive tone, the same passive-aggressive digs, the same emotional minefields, disguised as conversations. And you realized something chilling. The apology felt right, but the pattern stayed. Why? Because apologies are performances, sometimes sincere, often rehearsed, always strategic. A well-timed apology can reset the emotional clock. It buys time. It soothes outrage. It disarms retaliation. But it doesn't require change. Change is expensive. Change demands effort, accountability, self-confrontation. An apology, that's cheap. It's words. The pattern, that's the real language. That's where the truth. So often, we mistake relief for resolution. When someone says, "I'm sorry," what we feel is relief. The conflict is over. The tension dissolves. The anger cools. But that's not resolution. That's sedation. It numbs the wound, but it doesn't heal it. Because healing takes more than sentiment. It takes structure. Patterns are invisible until you step outside them. You can't see the loops when you're still spinning in them. One fight, one apology, one fragile honeymoon, over and over again. It starts to feel like progress, but it's really just movement. You're not going forward, you're orbiting, and orbiting is exhausting. There's a reason the cycle feels endless. It's engineered that way, especially by people who've learned how to manipulate guilt. They don't need to change if they can make you feel bad for asking them to. If they can turn your boundary into a betrayal, your pain into an accusation, your standards into selfishness. Suddenly, you're the one apologizing for needing something real, for not being over it fast enough, for refusing to reset the clock this time. But here's the question that cuts through the noise. What has actually changed? Not what they said, not how they looked when they said it, not even how you felt for a moment after hearing it, but what has materially changed about the behavior. If the answer is nothing, then it wasn't an apology, it was a performance, a brief lull between repetitions. And here's where it gets even darker. Sometimes the pattern doesn't just return, it escalates. Because now they know the minimum effort required to win your trust again. Now they know your threshold. Your forgiveness becomes a blueprint, a loophole, a weapon. Not because you're weak, but because you're hopeful. And hope, unfortunately, is a liability when it's not paired with clarity. You want to believe people can grow, that love matters more than ego, that pain teaches lessons, and it does for some. But for others, pain is leverage. Apologies are tactics. Empathy is mimicry. So, how do you know the difference? You stop listening to what they say, and you start watching what they repeat. Does the apology come with changed behavior, or just better camouflage? Does it lead to transformation, or just another loop in the cycle? Because if the pattern stayed, then the apology didn't mean what you hoped it did. It meant, let me back in. It meant, let me reset your expectations. It meant, let's pretend this never happened. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse emotional release with emotional repair. But here's the hard truth. Repetition is the real apology. The absence of the behavior is the only real proof. And anything less is just a pause in the manipulation. So if you find yourself thinking, but they said they were sorry, remember the apology felt right, but the pattern stayed. Have you ever said it's okay when it wasn't? When your chest tightened, your thoughts raced, but you still smiled and said, I forgive you, not because they deserved it, not because the pain was gone, but because the fight felt heavier than the wound. This is what it means to forgive, to avoid conflict. It's not forgiveness, it's surrender. You don't forgive because you're healed. You forgive because you're tired, because confrontation feels like a war you can't win. So you make peace, not with them, but with the silence you use to muffle your own resentment, the silence that grows louder the longer it goes unchallenged. This kind of forgiveness doesn't set you free. It cages you behind politeness. There's a term for this, conflict avoidance. It's a survival instinct dressed up as morality. Your mind convinces you that keeping the peace is noble, that being the bigger person is strength. But underneath that posture is fear, a fear of escalation, a fear of disapproval, a fear of being seen as difficult. Because when you were younger, maybe every disagreement became an explosion. Maybe you learned that speaking up meant punishment. Or maybe you were simply taught that harmony matters more than truth. So you forgive quickly, eagerly, as if rushing past pain will erase it. But it doesn't. The resentment lingers, quiet, suppressed. It festers in your tone, in your passive comments, in the tightness of your jaw. You don't want revenge, you want recognition. You want them to see what they did without you having to say it. But they won't. Why would they? You forgave them. You absolved them. You let them keep their comfort while you swallowed your unrest. That's the real transaction here. You trade your voice for the illusion of stability. And the cost, yourself. You start to doubt your anger. Was it valid? Were you overreacting? Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe it's your fault for being too sensitive. Slowly, your forgiveness becomes a tool, not for healing, but for gaslighting yourself. You rewrite memories to justify your silence. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. You become fluent in self-betrayal. You nod through violations. Until one day, someone crosses a line so blatantly that even your reflex to forgive stutters. And you realize you don't know how to confront anymore. You've outsourced your boundaries to the idea of being agreeable. You don't forgive to grow, you forgive to disappear. But let's be honest, real forgiveness isn't passive. Real forgiveness takes confrontation. It requires truth. It means looking someone in the eye and saying, "You hurt me," not to punish them, but to reclaim yourself. Real forgiveness comes after the storm, not instead of it. So ask yourself, who benefits when you forgive to avoid conflict? You or the people who fear accountability? Because every time you silence your truth to keep the peace, you reinforce the idea that your comfort doesn't matter, that your pain is negotiable, that your limits are suggestions, not boundaries. And maybe that's the most dangerous part when you start believing it too. You begin to think that your worth is tied to how little trouble you cause. That being lovable means being easy. That being accepted means being quiet. But you were never meant to be manageable. You were meant to be honest, too. No. Not every forgiveness is healing. Some are disguises. Some are traps. Some are just fear, dressed in forgiveness's clothing. And until you learn the difference, you will keep forgiving people who never changed. You will keep abandoning yourself to keep the illusion of peace alive. You forgive to avoid conflict, but in doing so, you create another one that lives inside you, one that doesn't end until you choose something harder, something louder. Truth, boundaries, confrontation, not because you want war, but because you deserve peace that doesn't cost you your voice. Have you ever noticed the people you're drawn to? Not just those you admire, but the ones who feel familiar, the ones who make your guard drop, who make you feel seen. There's a strange gravitational pull between certain people, one that doesn't always make logical sense. You might call it chemistry. You might call it fate. But here's a more unsettling possibility. You trust people who reflect your wounds. It's not kindness or charisma that builds your trust. It's recognition. Subtle cues, small behaviors, even certain tones of voice. These things can echo the dynamics of your past. The way a parent used to speak, the way an old wound was first inflicted. Your subconscious doesn't just remember pain, it seeks it out, because pain is familiar, and familiarity feels safe. even when it's not. Imagine someone who grew up with a distant father, emotionally unavailable, cold but respected. As an adult, they find themselves magnetized to emotionally distant partners. Not because it feels good, but because it feels right. Not consciously, not intentionally, but their nervous system lights up with a twisted kind of recognition. It's not affection they trust, it's absence. That's the script they learn to read. Your trauma creates a blueprint. It sketches the outline of what love looks like, what friendship looks like, even what safety feels like. If that blueprint was built on inconsistency, manipulation, or neglect, then you'll mistake those same traits for intimacy. You'll call red flags passion. You'll call chaos depth. You'll confuse intensity with connection and pain with loyalty. And the worst part, you'll defend these people. You'll rationalize their behavior. You'll say things like, they're just complicated, or they've been through a lot, because in some unconscious way, you're not just seeing them, you're seeing yourself. Or more accurately, the part of yourself that was never healed. You don't just trust people who reflect your wounds, you bond with them. Trauma bonds are forged in familiarity, not in love. You'll feel closer to someone who triggers your abandonment issues than someone who respects your boundaries. That's the paradox. The wound wants what it knows, and it will sabotage anything unfamiliar, even if that unfamiliarity is healthy. Think about that. Real kindness might feel suspicious. Real consistency might feel boring. Real intimacy might feel invasive. Because your reference point is pain. That's why healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about retraining your instincts, rewiring your trust, teaching your nervous system that safety doesn't have to be earned through suffering. You've likely heard the phrase, hurt people, hurt people. But here's the quieter truth. Hurt people, trust, hurt people. Not always visibly broken, but quietly echoing the same emotional injuries. That's why manipulative relationships can feel comforting. Why toxic friendships feel hard to leave. You're not just afraid of losing them. You're afraid of losing the version of yourself that fits inside them. But here's where the spiral breaks. When you start recognizing your patterns, not just intellectually but emotionally, you create space for something different, something better. Trust doesn't have to be a reenactment of old pain. It can become a choice, not a reflex. Ask yourself, who do I feel drawn to, and why? Is it their presence or their absence? Their kindness or their chaos? Do they challenge you to grow or pull you into roles you thought you'd escaped? The answers aren't easy, but they're necessary. Because the people you trust most aren't always the people who deserve it. Sometimes they're just the ones who speak the language of your wounds fluently. And it's your job, not theirs, to decide if you want to keep listening. Trust isn't about who feels familiar. It's about who's safe. And sometimes safety feels like nothing at all. No adrenaline, no ache. Just calm, stillness, peace. And if that feels strange to you, that's the wound talking, not your heart. Listen carefully. You'll learn to hear the difference. You miss pain and call it love. At first, it sounds absurd, but the more you sit with it, the more disturbing it becomes. Imagine someone who finally escapes a toxic relationship. They were gaslit, belittled, constantly on edge. And yet, weeks later, they miss it. Not the abuse, not the cruelty, but the intensity, the obsession, the feeling of being needed, that aching emotional gravity that wrapped around them like barbed wire and felt like love. This isn't just heartbreak, it's something deeper, more dangerous. It's the mind confusing familiarity with safety and trauma with intimacy. Because pain, when repeated often enough, begins to feel like home. Your brain learns through patterns. If every affection you received came laced with cruelty, your nervous system adapts. It wires itself to associate love with suffering, attention with anxiety. It learns that love is something you survive, not something you relax into. And over time, anything gentler feels wrong. Too quiet, too easy. That's the trap. You meet someone kind, calm, steady, and your body panics. You feel bored, restless. You tell yourself there's no spark, but it's not chemistry you're missing. It's chaos. It's the emotional roller coaster you mistook for passion. You've mistaken stability for apathy and peace for emptiness. Because for years, your mind equated high drama with high value. The more you had to fight for love, the more it meant, the harder it was to earn, the more convinced you were that it was real, like a prize at the end of a brutal obstacle course. But real love doesn't demand you bleed for it. It doesn't arrive through anxiety, self-erasure, or chasing someone who keeps running away. That's not love. That's survival. That's your trauma playing dress-up. Yet this lie is sticky because it flatters your suffering. It tells you that pain made you deeper, that endurance means love was real, that the sleepless nights and tear-streaked texts were proof of emotional depth, but they weren't. They were just signs that you were breaking yourself for someone who never deserved you. Still, the wound becomes familiar, and familiar starts to feel like fate. You look back at your most painful relationships and remember the passion, not the pain, the apologies, not the patterns, the makeups, not the reasons you always fell apart. You curate your memory into a highlight reel of twisted romance and forget the wreckage. You call it love, but it was really a mirror of your wounds. And here's the most unsettling part. Part of you doesn't want to let it go. Because letting go means admitting it wasn't love. That the years you invested, the identity you built, the stories you told yourself, they were based on a lie. And lies, when clung to long enough, become part of who you are. So you protect it. You romanticize it. You say things like, "We had our problems, but we loved hard." You convince yourself that suffering was sacred. That pain proved devotion. But pain is not proof of love. It's proof of misalignment. Still, the cycle continues. You seek out people who wound you in familiar ways. You chase intensity instead of connection. You feel more alive when love hurts because you're mistaking adrenaline for affection. And every time it ends, you swear you'll change. You promise you'll do better. But deep down, a voice whispers that this is just how love is. That voice isn't wisdom, it's conditioning, trauma, a false gospel preached by every toxic story you've lived through. To escape it, you have to unlearn everything that once kept you safe. You have to let go of the belief that love must be earned through suffering. You have to accept that peace won't always feel exciting at first, but it will feel like safety. And that's what love actually is. Not the butterflies, not the agony, but the deep exhale of knowing you're finally okay. You miss pain and call it love, because pain was once the only version of love you knew. But you're allowed to learn a new language. You're allowed to want something that doesn't hurt. You're allowed to stop mistaking the fire for warmth. Because love isn't supposed to burn you alive. It's supposed to bring you back to life. And if that doesn't feel familiar yet, that's okay. It just means you're finally doing it right. You map every move. You anticipate every variable. You simulate every outcome as if regret were a virus you could vaccinate against. Your mind becomes a war room. Blueprints, backup plans, contingency strategies, all designed to do one thing: avoid that gnawing, stomach-churning feeling that you got it wrong. But here's the trap. You're not planning to succeed. You're planning to feel safe. You convince yourself it's smart, strategic, responsible. But if you dig deeper, beneath the checklists and color-coded schedules, what you'll find is fear. Not of failure itself, but of how failure will make you feel, the shame, the helplessness, the weight of "I should have known better." This isn't logic, it's trauma masquerading as preparedness. Somewhere along the line, you learned that mistakes weren't just costly, they were proof. Proof that you were careless, stupid, unworthy. So you built a life around not making them. You overthink every decision, no matter how small. You double back, triple check, and still lie awake wondering, did I do the right thing? You've made regret the enemy, but regret isn't the real threat. It's your intolerance for regret. Your inability to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it through endless control. You don't want peace of mind. You want certainty. And when certainty isn't available, you trade your sanity trying to simulate it. Think about that. You'd rather torture yourself endlessly in advance than risk feeling bad after the fact. You don't trust yourself to handle regret. You fear it'll break you. So you go to war with the future, trying to seal off every path that might hurt. But the irony, that very obsession, creates the regret you're trying to avoid. You miss out. You stall. You let life pass you by, paralyzed by the possibility of choosing wrong. You look back and realize you never really lived. You just calculated, optimized, managed. And when regret finally comes, as it always does, it's worse. Because now it's not just about what happened. It's about everything you did to stop it and still failed. Now it's layered with shame, exhaustion, bitterness. Your coping mechanism becomes your prison. There's another cost too. Your relationships. You think you're being responsible, but to others you're distant, indecisive, cold. People don't feel your presence. They feel your fear. You're always one step ahead, one foot out the door, mentally rehearsing your exit in case things go wrong. It's hard to build trust with someone who's always planning for impact. You may think you're protecting yourself, but you're really abandoning yourself in the moment, again and again. So what do? You start by recognizing the lie that regret is unbearable. It isn't. It's a teacher, not a tyrant. It doesn't destroy you. It shows you where you need to grow, where you betrayed your instincts, where you made choices out of fear instead of truth. And most importantly, you learn to separate pain from punishment. Regret hurts, but it doesn't mean you deserve to suffer. Mistakes don't mean you're broken. They mean you're alive. Imagine what it would feel like to trust yourself enough to choose boldly, knowing that if you're wrong, you'll handle it. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but fully, with presence, with compassion. That's real power, not control, not foresight, but the unshakable belief that no matter what happens, you'll survive it without losing yourself. You don't need to outsmart regret. You need to outgrow your fear of it. Stop planning your life like it's a minefield. Live it like it's a story, messy, risky, gloriously uncertain. And when regret inevitably shows up, don't let it shame you into paralysis. Let it wake you up, because the worst regret isn't choosing wrong. It's never choosing at all. Have you ever caught yourself mimicking the way someone speaks? Borrowing their laugh, nodding just a little too quickly in agreement, even when you're not sure you actually agree. You weren't trying to lie. You weren't trying to deceive. You were trying to belong. Human beings are wired for mimicry. It's how we survive. Infants mirror their parents. Children copy their peers. Even adults unconsciously adjust their body language and tone to match whoever's across the table. We call it mirroring. Psychology calls it social adaptation. But in the wrong context, it becomes something darker, identity erosion. Because here's the hidden cost. You don't just copy people to fit in. You start erasing yourself in the process. Picture this. You're in a new environment. Maybe a job, a friend group, a culture. You start noticing what's rewarded, who gets laughed at, who gets praised, who gets ignored. And slowly, silently, you begin to shape yourself around that feedback. A joke you wouldn't normally laugh at suddenly seems hilarious. A belief you never questioned now feels like a requirement. You swap out parts of yourself, like gears in a machine, just to keep running with the group. This is more than peer pressure. It's social survival. We are tribal creatures. Rejection, even in modern life, feels like death. Your brain registers social exclusion in the same region that processes physical pain. So you adapt, you edit, you mimic. But over time, that mimicry stops being a strategy and starts becoming your reality. You begin to forget which opinions were truly yours. You second-guess your instincts because they're always clashing with the persona you've carefully sculpted to blend in. And every time you betray your authentic self to maintain approval, you lose something small but precious. You trade identity for inclusion. Now multiply that by years, decades. You're surrounded by people who like you, respect you, maybe even love you, but they're not loving you. They're loving the mask, the version of you that fits their expectations, their values, their comfort zones. And what happens when you want to take it off? You can't, because the moment you stop copying, the moment you assert your real thoughts, the harmony breaks. The belonging fractures, and that fear, the fear of being truly seen and then rejected, is paralyzing. So you keep copying, smiling when you're tired, nodding when you're unsure, laughing at things that aren't funny, endorsing ideas that make your stomach twist, all so you don't feel alone. But here's the irony. In trying so hard to belong, you become invisible. The real you, raw, messy, honest, is buried under layers of performance. And no one can connect with someone who's not there. This doesn't mean you're fake. It means you're conditioned. Conditioned to believe that acceptance is something you earn through compliance. That you're only lovable when you're agreeable. That disagreement means danger. And society reinforces this every step of the way. Schools reward conformity. Workplaces reward likability over integrity. Social media rewards mimicry of trends, tones, and aesthetics. The algorithm doesn't care who you are. It only cares how well you blend in. Even friendship groups have unspoken rules. Don't rock the boat. Don't get too intense. Don't question the group's consensus. You learn to read the room before you read yourself. But at some point, you need to ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I stop performing? When I stop copying? That answer won't come easily. It may scare you, because it means losing people, losing approval, losing comfort. But it also means gaining something far more vital, clarity. True belonging doesn't require imitation, it requires honesty. And not everyone will accept the real you, but the ones who do, they're worth every uncomfortable moment it took to find them. So the next time you catch yourself echoing someone else's thought, ask yourself, do I believe this? The next time you laugh too quickly, agree too easily, compliment something you secretly dislike, pause. That pause is your power. You don't need to copy people to belong. You need to reveal yourself. Even if your voice shakes, even if your truth offends, even if it means standing alone for a while, because standing alone in your truth is still better than being surrounded by people who only know your echo. Imagine this. You're sitting in a meeting. It's dragging. Everyone's restless, glancing at their watches. You've finished your part. You're no longer needed. But still, you sit, silent, waiting. Why? Because somewhere deep in your wiring, you're waiting for permission to leave. You don't need it. You know that. You could just stand up, nod politely, and walk out. But you don't. Because something inside you hesitates. Free will collides with invisible conditioning. And suddenly, you're not a person with autonomy. You're a child again, waiting for the bell to ring, for the teacher to dismiss you, for someone to tell you it's okay. This isn't just social etiquette. This is programming. From the moment you enter the world, you're trained to wait for instructions, for approval, for release. You're told when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak, when to stop. School trains obedience, not curiosity. Work rewards compliance, not independence. You learn almost without realizing it, that your instincts are dangerous, that initiative is risky, that even when you know you're done, you must wait for someone in authority to say so too. So you hesitate, not because you're unsure, but because you've been taught that permission is more important than conviction, and that training runs deep. It doesn't stop at meetings or classrooms. You wait for permission to feel anger, to grieve, to want more from life. You wait for someone else to validate your suffering before you let yourself cry. You wait for someone else to tell you you're capable before you chase a dream. You wait for signs, for reassurance, for proof, anything to make you believe that stepping forward is allowed. Even leaving a toxic relationship becomes an internal war. You know it's wrong. You feel the decay. But still, you wait. Maybe they'll change. Maybe someone will confirm it's bad enough. You stall, not because you don't know what to do, but because somewhere in your bones you believe the exit isn't yours to choose. The system thrives on this hesitation, because people who wait for permission are easier to manage. They follow rules they never questioned. They stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, routines that numb them, because leaving without permission feels like breaking the law. Even when no one is stopping you, you stop yourself. You become your own jailer. And the prison, it's built from politeness, guilt, and fear. Fear that you'll be judged, seen as rude, selfish, or unstable. Fear that stepping out of line means being cast out. So you stay, you smile, you wait for the nod, the cue, the approval that might never come. But here's the trap. The permission you're waiting for isn't real. No one will come tap you on the shoulder and say, "You're free now." No boss will tell you it's time to pursue your art. No partner will tell you they're wrong for you. No institution will ever admit they've been holding you back. If you're waiting for permission, you'll wait forever. Because the truth is, you've always had the key. You just didn't believe you were allowed to use it. And here's the darker twist. The system teaches you to fear using that key, to believe that choosing for yourself is arrogance, that walking away is failure, that saying "I'm done" makes you weak. It creates a moral hierarchy where staying, enduring, complying, waiting is virtuous, and leaving is betrayal. But what if it's not? What if walking out isn't rebellion? It's revelation. What if permission is just an illusion meant to keep you seated in a room you no longer belong in? What if the real courage isn't in waiting, but in leaving? Think about how much of your life is delayed by invisible boundaries. Think about the dreams deferred, the questions unasked, the changes postponed, all because you didn't think you were allowed. How much of your potential is trapped behind imaginary doors, locked not by rules, but by reluctance? The world won't free you. It doesn't care if you stay or go. But you should, because the longer you wait for permission to leave, the more time you give away to bosses who don't value you, to partners who don't love you, to systems that never had your best interest in mind. You wait, and life quietly moves on without you. So maybe it's time to stop asking, Not for validation, not for approval, but for forgiveness. For all the years you spent waiting, you don't need permission to leave the meeting. The job, the relationship, the identity, the life that no longer fits you. You just need to stand up and walk out. You finally start to feel better. Not perfect, not healed, but better. The constant ache that followed you like a shadow starts to loosen its grip. You find yourself laughing more, sleeping a little easier, maybe even looking forward to something. And just when that flicker of peace arrives, something else sneaks in, uninvited, guilt. You feel guilty for healing, because in some twisted corner of your mind, healing feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the pain, the loss, the person you were when everything fell apart. A part of you whispers, you're not supposed to move on, not yet. Maybe not ever. This is the trap. The emotional booby trap that turns recovery into something shameful. You start questioning your own progress. Was it too soon? Too easy? Do you even deserve peace? And worst of all, what does it say about you that you're okay, while others are still drowning? You start measuring your healing against other people's suffering. It's as if pain has become your proof of loyalty. As if staying broken honors what happened. You confuse healing with forgetting. You worry that moving forward means the pain never mattered, that the loss wasn't real if you're not still bleeding from it every day. This isn't just emotional baggage, it's emotional conditioning. You've been taught that suffering makes you more authentic, that happiness is superficial, that being okay means you're out of touch, insensitive, detached. Somewhere along the way, trauma became your identity, and healing feels like erasing that identity entirely. But here's the deeper truth. The guilt isn't about healing, it's about permission. You're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay. Okay to feel joy again. Okay to stop explaining your sadness to the world. Okay to no longer wear your grief like a name tag. But no one's coming. No one's handing you that permission slip. Because this guilt isn't logical. It's inherited. Passed down by a culture that romanticizes pain and stigmatizes recovery. We praise resilience, but secretly admire suffering. We say, take your time, but silently judge those who move on too soon. We don't teach people how to heal, we teach them how to perform pain convincingly. So you start to perform too. You keep the ache alive in public, even as it fades in private. You downplay your progress. You censor your happiness. You become fluent in emotional code switching, hiding your recovery to protect others from the discomfort of your joy. But healing isn't a betrayal, it's a rebellion. A quiet, defiant act against the forces that told you to stay wounded forever. It's not a declaration that nothing happened, it's a refusal to let what happened define every day of your life. Healing says, yes, it mattered. And I'm still here. And still, the guilt persists. Because healing means changing. And change always threatens something. When you start to heal, people around you may not recognize you anymore. They may resist your growth, try to anchor you in your old pain. Because your healing reminds them of the healing they haven't yet done. Sometimes the guilt isn't even yours, it's theirs. Their fear, their inertia, their need for you to stay where they are. Misery loves company, not because it's malicious, but because it's familiar. If you rise, it exposes the fact that rising is possible. And not everyone is ready for that truth. So you shrink. You pretend you're still in pieces, because the world knows how to treat broken things better than it knows how to welcome someone whole. You dim your light to avoid making others squint. And yet, deep down, something in you knows this isn't right. Because healing isn't a competition. It's not a betrayal. It's not a timeline to be measured or justified. Healing is sacred, personal, unpredictable, and above all deserved. You're allowed to feel better. You're allowed to be okay. You're allowed to laugh, love, hope, and thrive without apology. Because guilt has no place in healing, and you don't need permission to be whole. You wake up exhausted. You push through your day exhausted. You go to bed exhausted. And somewhere along the way, you've started to believe this is what success feels like. You weren't born thinking that. You were taught it, conditioned, indoctrinated. Because somewhere along the way, exhaustion stopped being a warning sign and started being a badge of honor. You're not just tired, you're being tricked. Think back to when someone last praised you, not for what you created, solved, or understood, but simply for how much you were willing to endure. You've been working non-stop. I don't know how you do it all. These sound like compliments, but they're not celebrating your accomplishments. They're celebrating your collapse. Exhaustion has been rebranded as dedication. Overwork has been disguised as ambition. And burnout, that's now a status symbol. This isn't accidental. It starts early. School teaches you that success means late nights and little sleep, sacrificing play, joy, even health for the sake of performance. You're taught to wear your suffering like a medal, that the less time you have for yourself, the more valuable you must be. By the time you enter the workforce, the pattern is already etched deep. Productivity becomes identity. Your worth is measured in output, not insight. You stop asking whether the work means anything and start asking only, how much can I take? But here's the trap. You begin to confuse exhaustion with progress. You believe that suffering more means achieving more, that the ache in your bones is proof of your value, that the emptiness in your chest is just the price of greatness. And every system around you reinforces this. Workplaces reward those who say yes to everything, who never take breaks, who respond to emails at midnight and show up early the next morning. These aren't signs of responsibility. They're symptoms of a deeper sickness. One where rest feels like laziness and slowing down feels like failure. You're applauded not for thinking better, but for surviving worse. And then there's social media, where exhaustion becomes performance. You post about your grind, your sleepless nights, your endless hustle. You craft an image of a person who never stops. You craft an image of a person who never stops. And in return, you're flooded with admiration, as if pushing yourself to the edge is something to be admired. But no one sees the cost. The migraines, the lost time, the forgotten passions, the creeping sense that you don't even know who you are anymore without the struggle. You've been sold a lie that success and suffering are twins. But what if exhaustion isn't a sign of success? What if it's a sign that the system is working exactly as intended and you're breaking exactly as planned? Think about it. A tired person doesn't ask hard questions. A tired person doesn't organize, protest, or revolt. A tired person just wants to survive the day. That's the brilliance of it. Your exhaustion makes you easier to control. You're so busy trying to prove you're enough that you forget to ask, enough for whom, and enough of what? The truth is, exhaustion feels like success because that's what you've been conditioned to believe. But real success doesn't feel like collapse. It doesn't leave you numb, hollow, or disconnected. Real success sustains you. It energizes you. It makes space for you to breathe, to think, to live. But here's the hard part. Letting go of the exhaustion means letting go of the identity you've built around it. The part of you that finds worth in being needed. The part that fears stillness because it feels like being forgotten. The part that equates rest with irrelevance. You're not lazy for wanting rest. You're not weak for needing recovery. You're human, and your value was never supposed to be measured by your capacity to endure pain. So stop glorifying exhaustion. Stop mistaking burnout for accomplishment. Stop trading your health, your time, your joy for praise that only feeds the machine. You don't have to earn your worth through suffering. You already have it. You don't have to be exhausted to matter. You just have to be awake enough to see the lie for what it is, and strong enough to walk away from it. Have you ever felt tolerated? Not truly accepted, not celebrated, just permitted to exist. It's a strange sensation, a subtle chill in the warmth of human connection, the quiet voice whispering, "You can stay, but only if you behave." Being tolerated feels like being loved until you realize it's not. It's mimicry, a counterfeit so precise it can fool you for years. At first, it feels good. Someone listens. Someone smiles. You're included in the group chat, invited to dinner, maybe even told you're part of the family. And why wouldn't you believe it? You're doing everything right. You're polite. You're agreeable. You hide the parts of yourself that might stir discomfort. You learn quickly what they want, and you give it to them. But over time, something gnaws at you. It's in the pauses between their compliments, the absence of curiosity about who you really are, the way their tone shifts when you disagree. You start to realize they don't love you. They love the version of you that never makes them uncomfortable. Because that's what tolerance is. Conditional acceptance. It's permission with strings attached. You're allowed to exist as long as you stay within the lines they've drawn. Step outside those lines, show too much anger, too much sadness, too much truth, and the tolerance thins, cracks, breaks. And then the punishment comes, not loud or violent, but soft and strategic. A look of disappointment, a withdrawn invitation. A quiet shift in tone that tells you you've made things harder. You've broken the unspoken contract. You've made them feel something they didn't want to feel. This is why being tolerated feels so close to love, because it's built on performance. You give, they receive. You shrink, they stay. But it's hollow, fragile, built on your ability to suppress what makes you inconvenient. The trap is this. The more you crave love, the more you're willing to accept tolerance in its place. Especially if you've been starved for affection or raised to believe your worth depends on how useful, agreeable, or easy you are to others. You become a shapeshifter, a mirror. You don't ask, "Do they love me?" You ask, "What version of me will they keep?" This is psychological captivity, disguised as connection. It's not about belonging. It's about survival, and society trains you for it early. In classrooms, you're praised for obedience. At work, you're rewarded for not questioning authority. In relationships, you're told that compromise means silencing your needs. Everywhere, the message is the same. Be palatable, be manageable, be easy to tolerate. Even worse, when you finally begin to speak your truth, to take up space, you're labeled difficult, too much, selfish. You're punished not for who you are, but for no longer hiding it. So you ask yourself, is this love? Is love a cage that only opens when you're convenient? Is love something you earn by diminishing yourself? Or is love the rare, terrifying force that sees you fully, your darkness, your rage, your grief, and still says, "Stay. You don't have to edit yourself for me." When you've been tolerated for too long, true love feels dangerous. It demands vulnerability. It doesn't reward your performance. It asks you to stop performing altogether. But here's the twist. Once you've tasted true love, real, unconditional, chaotic love, you can never go back. You start to notice all the counterfeit versions. You start to see where you're merely endured, and it becomes unbearable. Because the truth is, tolerance is never love. It's containment. It's emotional management. It's the system's way of keeping you grateful for scraps, obedient for approval, and small enough to never threaten the balance. But you are not here to be tolerated. You are not a guest in your own life. You are not a burden to be managed. You are meant to be seen, heard, and known entirely. So if you feel merely tolerated, ask yourself, what would it mean to stop performing? What would it cost to walk away from spaces that only welcome your silence? And more importantly, what would you gain? Because once you stop mistaking tolerance for love, you begin the terrifying, liberating work of demanding something real. And when you finally find it, you'll know. Because real love doesn't just allow you to be, it insists on it. You're walking down a hallway, silent, controlled. You passed someone, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger. There was something you wanted to say, something you almost said, but you didn't. You smiled, you nodded, you walked on, and now, hours later, it haunts you. You remember what you didn't say. The words are ghosts now, circling your mind like vultures, not because they were profound, but because they were honest, real, needed, and you held them back. Why? It starts subtly. You don't say what you feel because you don't want to start a conflict. You don't ask that question because it might sound stupid. You don't tell the truth because it might make things worse. You trade honesty for harmony, truth for silence. And each time you do, a piece of you gets quieter. You convince yourself it was nothing, just a moment, just a sentence. But the silence begins to grow roots. It creeps into your conversations, your relationships, your sense of self. You become fluent in avoidance, skilled in swallowing discomfort. You learn to edit your reality before it even leaves your lips. Why? Because speaking truth has consequences. People might get hurt. They might look at you differently. They might leave. So you rehearse the acceptable version, the smoother one. You start to anticipate what others want to hear and reshape your thoughts accordingly. You think you're being smart, diplomatic. But underneath, something starts to erode. It's not just what you didn't say to others. It's what you didn't say to yourself. You didn't admit you were unhappy in that relationship. You didn't confront the feeling that your job is draining the life out of you. You didn't ask why you feel anxious every time you wake up. You distracted yourself. You scrolled. You joked. You kept moving. But the silence followed. What you don't say becomes what defines you. It shapes your decisions, your routines, your boundaries or lack of them. You think you're avoiding discomfort, but what you're really avoiding is clarity. And the mind remembers. It remembers the moment you could have defended yourself but didn't. The time you wanted to tell someone you loved them but froze. The apology you never gave. The truth you buried so deep you almost forgot it was there. Almost, but not quite. These unspoken moments don't vanish. They echo, late at night, in quiet rooms, in the middle of laughter. They wait for you, and they whisper, "You knew what to say. Why didn't you?" Sometimes it's fear. Other times it's politeness. Often it's self-preservation. You learn somewhere along the way that vulnerability is dangerous. That truth is messy, that being honest means being exposed. And maybe once, when you were, someone punished you for it. So you built a mask. And here's the real trap. The longer you wear the mask, the harder it is to take off. People start to love the version of you that never disagrees, never demands, never feels too much. You become easy, predictable, palatable. But inside, you're screaming, because you remember what you didn't say. And now every interaction becomes a calculation. Every silence, a negotiation. You start to wonder who you would be if you ever just spoke freely, without filters, without fear. Who would stay? Who would leave? Who would you become? This is the invisible war, the one between truth and comfort. And most people, understandably, choose comfort. But comfort has a cost. It slowly robs you of your voice, your authenticity, your presence, and the cruel irony. What you don't say often says more than any words ever could. You may think you're protecting others by holding back. But what if you're just abandoning yourself? You may think you're keeping the peace. But maybe all you're doing is postponing the explosion. And you may think you're in control. But silence, prolonged, chronic silence, becomes its own prison. A place where you're the warden and the prisoner. So ask yourself, what are you not saying? To your friend, your partner, your parent, yourself. What truth is begging to be spoken? What pain have you swallowed so many times? It now feels like part of you. You remember what you didn't say because some part of you still wants to say it, still needs to, still aches to be free. And maybe the voice inside you hasn't disappeared. Maybe it's just waiting for permission. Have you ever stayed quiet? Not because you had nothing to say, but because saying it felt dangerous. Not physically dangerous. Socially, emotionally, spiritually. Silence is easier. It doesn't draw attention. It doesn't risk judgment. It doesn't invite conflict or rejection. When you stay silent, no one can misunderstand you, mock you, or weaponize your words against you. You remain invisible, untouched, safe, or so it seems. Because here's the trap: silence feels like protection, but it's really a prison. When you were a child, you may have learned that expressing your needs came with consequences. Maybe your voice triggered anger. Maybe your truth embarrassed someone. Maybe the people around you taught you, intentionally or not, that being seen meant being punished, so you adapted. You folded yourself into smaller and smaller shapes, tucking away opinions, hiding emotions, dimming your presence. You traded visibility for safety, and the world rewarded you for it, praised you for being easygoing, low maintenance, quiet. You became the one who doesn't cause trouble, the one who listens more than they speak, the one who doesn't take up space. But beneath that stillness, there's a storm. Your silence becomes a mask, worn so long it fuses with your skin. You start to forget what your voice even sounds like. Not just the sound of it, but the substance of it. What do you believe? What do you feel? What do you want? Silence makes those questions harder to answer. Because being seen, truly seen, is terrifying when you've built your identity around not being a burden. And yet, the longer you stay invisible, the more the world misunderstands you. People assume you're fine, that you're satisfied, that you don't need anything at all. But you do. You crave connection. You long for someone to notice what you don't say, to see the pain behind your smile, to recognize the courage it takes just to be in the room. But people can't see what you won't show. The danger isn't in being seen. The danger is in never being known. Here's what no one tells you. Silence is not neutral. It has a cost. It costs you authenticity. It costs you self-respect. Over time, it doesn't just keep others out. It shuts you off from yourself. You stop trusting your own instincts. You begin to believe that your feelings are invalid, that your discomfort is your fault, that invisibility is a virtue. It's not. Invisibility is a wound. And here's the paradox. The longer you stay silent to avoid pain, the more pain you accumulate. Your silence becomes a magnet for mistreatment, for misunderstanding, for misalignment. People don't mistreat you because they're cruel. They mistreat you because they can't see the boundary. You're too afraid to draw. They walk over you, not because you're weak, but because you're silent. And silence, especially in the face of harm, reads like permission. So you end up alone, not because no one cares, but because no one knows how to reach you. You've trained them not to. You taught them that you're okay with less. that you don't need attention, that your needs are optional. You trained them to overlook you, to underestimate you, to love the version of you that doesn't really exist. And now you don't know how to undo it. But here's the truth. You don't heal by being silent. You heal by speaking. You heal by letting yourself be seen, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if your words don't come out perfect, because being seen is a risk. But it's also the only way to be known. And isn't that what you've wanted all along? To be understood, to be felt, to be real. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will listen, but some will. Some will hear your voice and finally see you, not the version you performed, but the one you buried. And that version, that buried self, it's the most powerful thing you've got, because silence may feel safer, but it's not where you're meant to live. You weren't born to be invisible. You weren't born to be quiet. You were born to be heard, and maybe that starts with one small moment, one truth whispered, one boundary drawn, one time you say, "No, that's not okay," or "Yes, I do need help." That moment is the beginning, not of noise, but of freedom. You walk into a room, not just any room, a therapy room, but there's no therapist, no clipboard, no gentle questions, just a mirror. You're told to look at yourself. Really look, not your face, not your hair, deeper, into the parts of you you usually avoid, the parts that ache, the parts that beg. You realize something. You don't just want to be seen, you want to be seen in your pain, not just despite it, but because of it. Somewhere along the line, you stopped seeking healing and started craving recognition for the damage. Because validation feels like redemption, like proof that you mattered, that the suffering meant something. You post about your struggle online. You talk about your trauma, your anxiety, your heartbreak, and each like, each comment feels like a salve, like applause for your wounds. Not healing, just applause. Because healing, that's invisible, that's quiet. It doesn't get likes. It doesn't draw attention. It doesn't make you special. But pain gets attention. Pain gives you a story, an identity, a reason why people should care. It starts as survival. You were hurt, and nobody noticed. So you learn to perform your pain, to package it, to make it visible. Maybe as a child, the only time adults paid attention was when you were sad, or broken, or silent with tears in your eyes. Maybe that's how you learned damage equals sign attention, and attention equals sign love. But what happens when that formula sticks? You start building a personality around the wound, around being the one who's been through so much, around being the survivor, the empath, the broken one who still tries. Your trauma becomes a brand. You start to curate your pain. You edit it, shape it, dramatize it, not out of malice, but instinct, because you've learned the more raw your suffering looks, the more people lean in, the more they validate, the more they reflect back the identity you've wrapped yourself in. But slowly, something shifts. You're no longer sure who you are without the struggle, without the narrative, without the emotional performance. Healing starts to feel like death, not of your body, but of your identity. Who are you without your damage? Who are you without the need to be rescued? This is the trap. The pain becomes home, not because it's comfortable, but because it's familiar. It gives you structure, a script, a role to play. And when people validate that role, you cling tighter. You resist growth. You avoid anything that might threaten the storyline. You become addicted to being understood as broken. So you find people who validate the wound, who mirror back your sadness, who keep you in place, not out of cruelty, but codependence. It's not just about being seen. It's about being seen in a specific way, as the one who was hurt, as the one who survived, as the one whose pain was real and raw and deserving. And any suggestion of healing, of moving forward, feels like betrayal, like someone's trying to erase what happened. But here's the truth. You won't want to hear real healing requires you to let go of being the main character in your tragedy. It requires you to stop needing applause for your scars. It demands that you outgrow the very identity that once kept you safe. It asks, can you matter without being broken? Can you exist in fullness without needing your pain as proof? Shelley, this is terrifying, because for years the pain was your compass, your guide, your voice. But now it's a cage, and the validation you crave, it's not love, it's not healing. It's just noise, fleeting, addictive, empty. What you really crave, what you've always craved, is not to be pitied, not to be applauded, but to be whole, to be seen, not just in spite of your past, and not because of it either, but simply as you are, unperformed, undamaged, unafraid, not a victim, not a warrior, not a survivor, just you. Have you ever been shattered by someone's silence? Not the awkward kind, not the brief, forgettable lapse in conversation. I mean the deliberate, hollow silence that arrives exactly when you need words the most. When you've poured your heart out, when you're drowning in confusion, begging for clarity, and instead of answers, all you get is stillness, emptiness, nothing. And in that vacuum, something terrifying happens. You start to fill in the blanks yourself. Because silence isn't neutral. It isn't passive, it speaks loudly. And what it says, what it implies, is often more painful than any spoken rejection. You begin to assume, to internalize, to blame. Maybe they're not answering because they don't care. Maybe they agree with your worst fears. Maybe your worth, your truth, your entire sense of self is being silently invalidated. And slowly, their silence becomes your truth. This is the mind trap. Silence becomes proof, proof of guilt, proof of abandonment, proof of inferiority. But whose proof is it, really? We're not wired to tolerate ambiguity. Our brains are desperate for patterns, conclusions, closure. So when someone leaves a void, we don't just leave it empty. We rush to fill it with our own insecurities, our own self-doubt. We make their silence say what we fear most, and we believe it. We interpret coldness as disgust, indifference as condemnation, distance as confirmation that we are too much or not enough. That's the cruelty of human psychology. Silence isn't just absence, it becomes a mirror, a twisted one. It reflects back not who they are, but who we're afraid we are. And we don't even realize it's happening. This is why stonewalling works so well as a control tactic. It's not just a refusal to speak, it's a transfer of power. The silent one holds the narrative hostage, and the one left in the dark starts rewriting the story against themselves. You start apologizing for things you didn't do. You start chasing, bending, shrinking, all in an attempt to provoke a reaction, to break the silence, to feel seen again. But the more you chase, the more power you give. The more silence hurts, the more it controls. Eventually, silence doesn't just feel like rejection. It feels like reality. You don't need to be screamed at to feel broken. You just need to be erased, ignored, dismissed with nothing but quiet. And it's not just in relationships. This happens at work, in families, in society. A boss who never gives feedback. A parent who refuses to acknowledge mistakes. A government that answers protests with silence. that absence speaks, and it's devastating, because it tells you you're not even worth a response, not even worth recognition. You can fight anger, you can challenge lies, but you can't argue with silence. It doesn't engage, it doesn't budge. And that makes it one of the most psychologically destabilizing weapons there is. So what can you do? You have to learn to distrust the voice that silence creates, to separate what is real from what is projection. Just because someone refuses to speak doesn't mean your worst thoughts are true. Their silence is not an indictment of your worth. It is a reflection of their inability to confront, to care, or to communicate. Their silence might be cowardice, or cruelty, or confusion, but it is not confirmation. That's the trap. When you treat silence like evidence, when you forget that someone else's refusal to acknowledge you says more about them than it ever could about you. Silence only controls you if you let it become your inner voice. So speak to yourself, out loud if you must. Remind yourself what you know to be true, that you tried, that you reached out, that your emotions are valid, that you are still here. Silence may echo, it may haunt, but it does not define. Let the absence be theirs, not yours. You ever notice that you feel guilty when you rest? Not lazy, not bored, guilty, like you're doing something wrong, something shameful, even if your body is aching, even if your mind is fractured from too much noise. The moment you stop moving, stop producing, stop striving, the shame creeps in. Quiet, heavy, paralyzing. But where did that voice come from? It wasn't born in you. No child feels guilty for playing, for napping, for just existing. That guilt, it was installed, slowly, repetitively, like software running in the background of your life. You were trained to believe that rest is weakness, that stillness is waste, that your worth is measured by your output. It's not just cultural, it's structural. The system needs you exhausted. It wants you running in circles, constantly proving your value through effort and productivity. Rest disrupts that. Rest is rebellion, because a rested person starts to think clearly, starts to see the cracks in the system, starts to remember that their value doesn't have to be earned, but instead of encouraging rest, you were taught to fear it. Think about the last time you let yourself truly rest. No phone, no guilt, no multitasking, just being. How long did that peace last before your brain whispered something venomous? You're being lazy. You don't deserve this. You should be doing more. That voice isn't yours. It's the echo of every reward withheld when you didn't perform. Every compliment tied to your achievements. Every moment love was conditional. And over time you internalized it. Now, even when no one's watching, you punish yourself. You scroll endlessly, not for joy, but because it feels more justifiable than rest. You fill your calendar until your own name disappears. You equate exhaustion with virtue, and when you finally collapse, you call it self-care. But it's not. It's survival, and barely that. The truth is, guilt has become your default state. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done nothing at all. And in a world built on hustle and comparison, nothing feels criminal. But what if that's exactly the point? What if making you feel guilty for rest is how the system keeps you compliant? When you're ashamed to rest, you never fully recover. And when you don't recover, you don't resist, you don't question, you don't dream. You just function, barely. You become predictable, controllable, a cog, a resource, a perfectly obedient machine wearing a human face. But there's another truth, one that's harder to accept. The shame you feel for resting is not just societal, it's personal. You fused your identity so tightly with your productivity that without it, you don't know who you are. Rest threatens that identity. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you've neglected, ignored, abandoned. The parts that don't perform. The parts that simply exist. And existence, raw and unpolished, is terrifying because it asks nothing and promises nothing. It just is. And that's uncomfortable when you've spent your life trying to prove you're enough. But what if the real shame isn't in resting, but in never allowing yourself to rest? What if the greatest betrayal is not that you take breaks, but that you believe you need to earn them? There is no productivity quota that justifies your existence. There is no cosmic ledger tracking your hustle. There is no invisible judge waiting to praise you for burning out. There is only this, your body, your mind, your breath. And they are not machines, they are not tools. They are you, and they are worthy of rest, without shame, without guilt, without condition. So the next time you feel that shame rising, when you try to pause, ask yourself, who profits from this guilt? Who benefits from your exhaustion? Who wins when you forget how to simply be? Because it's not you, and it never was.